Communities will involve ensuring that a range of options are available and accessible to the people who need them. Like a move to see drug use as a health issue, not a criminal one, a major rethink of current drug policy, and managing expectations for what new ideas for tackling Canada's overdose crisis can and can't do. Back to our expert witness, Kennedy Stewart.
About 95% of drug users relapse at one time or another. It's a lifetime. It's like alcoholism. These are diseases that need proper treatment. This is not going to fix itself. It needs significant government intervention to address this.
This edition of The Inquiry was presented by me, Charmaine Cozier. The producer was Jill Collins, researcher Matt Tolson, editor Tara McDermott, and technical producer Richard Hannaford.
That was The Inquiry from the BBC. I'm Saroja Coelho here on CBC Radio 1. Have a great day.
Good morning, Manitoba. Welcome to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1. I'm Emily Brass in this week for Marcy Marcusa. With me this morning are our show director, May McKillop, our studio technician, Abby Adeyemi, and Josh Crabb is right here in the studio with me with the CBC News headlines.
Good morning. The sister of a 15-year-old attacked with a machete says it's a miracle her brother is alive. The teen was walking with some friends on Selkirk Avenue near Aikens after a soccer game Saturday night when he was robbed and assaulted. Another 15-year-old has been charged with aggravated assault. Another Ukrainian family has fled war only to be greeted with violence on the streets of Winnipeg. A mother and her 14-year-old son were beaten with a baseball bat earlier this month in an unprovoked daylight attack in the Elmwood, East Kildonan area. And a Winnipeg parent says she's frustrated her local library is set to cut its hours back, even as the city prepares to increase library hours overall across the system. More on that in your next local CBC News at 6:30.
Thank you, Josh.
You're welcome.
That's CBC's Josh Crabb. Well, coming up in the first hour of the show, in the face of increasing threats on politicians, who should be responsible for keeping Parliament Hill secure? We'll look into that question with federal politics reporter Laura Osman. Have you heard of digital sobriety? Well, that's the practice of reducing your digital interactions to cut down on your carbon footprint. CBC's Manjula Sevalraja looks at whether it can make a difference. A comprehensive new report was recently published in the leading medical journal, The Lancet. Talks all about dementia, including risk factors you can change to lower your risk. Dr. Raj Bardwaj will join us with more. But first, we'll speak with a Manitoba author whose stories show the world through the eyes of cats. Quick look at the forecast now in Winnipeg. Mainly cloudy today. Slight chance of showers this morning and late this afternoon. Risk of a thunderstorm. Quite windy with a high of 28. Tonight, cloudy, 60% chance of showers and risk of a thunderstorm early in the evening. Breezy, becoming light later in the evening with a low of 18. And for tomorrow, mainly cloudy with a 60% chance of showers. High 26, 31 with the humidex. And looking north right now in Thompson, a mix of sun and cloud, becoming cloudy this afternoon with a chance of showers, risk of a thunderstorm, local smoke with a high of 26. We've got a lot more coming on Information Radio.
Today on Q.
Discovering that I loved writing fiction so much was just a relief.
I'm Talia Schlanger sitting in for Tom Power. If you've ever struggled with time management, you're going to want to hear from Carly Fortune about her incredibly methodical approach to writing a book hour by hour, day by day, all the way to the New York Times bestseller list.
Q, this morning at 10:30 in Newfoundland, and on the CBC Listen app, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is World Report. Good morning, I'm Marcia Young. There's growing evidence Canada is caught in a dangerous climate cycle. Last year's extreme wildfire season drove an increase in global carbon emissions. And international research is warning those increased emissions mean bigger wildfires will be more likely in the future. The CBC's Ben Shingler has the details.
You could say that Canada was record-breaking, or, I'd go as far as saying it's record-shattering in a way. It's completely unprecedented.
Matthew Jones is a climate change researcher at the University of East Anglia in England. His team has been studying last year's wildfires for a new global report in the journal Earth System Science Data, and he says Canada stood out for all the wrong reasons.
We saw almost a decade's worth of fire emissions just in one fire season.
The country set records when it comes to the size of fires, how quickly they spread, and the total area burned, 6 times more than the average since 2001. This summer's wildfire season isn't on pace to be as bad, even with wildfires outside Jasper, Alberta, still burning.
It'll be an ongoing battle for Parks Canada and Alberta Wildfire to deal with for the next few months for sure, until the winter.
And the report found that if we don't cut emissions, extreme wildfire seasons in Canada will be more common, 6 to 11 times more likely by the year 2100.
And so reality is just catching up with what we have been predicting.
The findings aren't a surprise to Zev Gedaloff. He's a forestry researcher at the University of Guelph in Ontario.
The fact that wildfire is increasing and that increase is associated with climate change is something that fire scientists and climate scientists have been saying is going to happen for decades now.
In the decades to come, Gedaloff says it's crucial our forests are better managed and our homes proofed so that these ever-increasing fires have less to fuel them. Ben Shingler, CBC News, Montreal.
Ukraine's incursion into Russia is advancing quickly. U.S. President Joe Biden says he knows it's causing problems for Russian President Vladimir Putin.
It's creating a real dilemma for Putin, and we've been in direct contact, constant contact with the Ukrainians.
Overnight, Ukraine launched another huge drone offensive. Russia's military says it shot down more than 100 drones, some deep in its territory. The Russian region of Belgorod across the border from Kharkiv is now in a state of emergency. Here's the governor speaking through a translator.
The situation in our Belgorod region continues to remain extremely difficult and tense. Daily shelling from the armed forces of Ukraine destroyed houses, wounded and dead civilians.
Ukraine's military says it controls more than 70 towns and villages in Russia's Kursk region, and it has captured more than 100 Russian prisoners of war. This morning, Ukraine is fending off more attacks on its energy infrastructure. Here in Canada, an organization is raising money to help rebuild Ukraine's largest children's hospital. It was destroyed last month during a series of strikes by Russia. Idil Musa has more.
Imagine we as Canadians, as Torontonians, lose the ability to have sick kids.
Valery Kostuk is the executive director of the Canada-Ukraine Foundation. His organization is trying to help Ukraine's biggest children's hospital rebuild after a deadly missile strike in early July. Oksana Fomenyuk's 16-year-old daughter, Solomia, was undergoing life-saving dialysis treatment when the Akhmedet Hospital in Kiev was struck. Video footage shows the teen carried out on a stretcher, covered in blood. Nowhere is safe in Ukraine, says Fomenyuk. Not in the shelters, not in a children's hospital. Russia denies being behind the attack, but the United Nations says there's a high likelihood it was one of their missiles. The hospital is now trying to repair the damage.
The urgency is real.
Kostuk's organization helped send 17 dialysis machines to Ukraine in 2022. It's now trying to raise $1 million to help the children's hospital get a hold of much-needed equipment. Meanwhile, the hospital says it's continuing to provide care despite the challenges of a brutal war. Idil Musa, CBC News, Toronto.
The United States has approved a $20 billion military deal with Israel. The Pentagon says it will allow for the sale of F-15 fighter jets, tank cartridges, mortar cartridges, and Army vehicles. The jets will not be delivered until 2029, but other equipment could begin arriving in Israel by 2026. Since the war with Hamas began last October, the U.S. reportedly sent thousands of Hellfire missiles and 2,000-pound bombs to Israel. The Prime Minister of Japan says he will not be seeking re-election. Fumio Kishida says it's time for change within his Liberal Democratic Party. And it begins with him stepping aside. The party has been under fire because of several scandals, including the mishandling of donations. Laura Marchand has the latest from Tokyo.
It was a matter of when, not if. But many in Japan were still shocked to hear their prime minister was throwing in the towel. Kishida's 3 short years in power saw many sour on him and his party.
私は来たる
The final nail in the coffin, a fundraising scandal with Liberal Democratic Party members pocketing kickbacks as the average Japanese citizen is struggling to make ends meet amid record high inflation. Only 25% of Japanese citizens approved of his administration, according to the public broadcaster. But people here say they were still surprised to see him go. This woman says she was shocked to hear the news, but said he couldn't survive the scandals plaguing the party. This office worker says it feels like Kishida didn't have a choice. The LDP lost some key by-elections earlier this year, and Kishida himself was set to face a leadership contest in September, one many say he couldn't win. Kishida said it's time for a new generation to lead the party, but the question is whether a new face will be enough to save the LDP in a country that seems eager for change. Laura Marchand, CBC News, Tokyo.
The U.S. government is making changes to try to stop migrants from illegally crossing over from Canada. It's trying to speed up the asylum claim process. Under the Safe Third Country Agreement, asylum seekers have to apply for refugee status in the first country they enter. Now, if they want an exemption, they will have to have their documents ready for U.S. border officials. Their screening can no longer be postponed, and migrants will only get 4 hours to consult a lawyer before it happens. After several months of disruptions for air travelers, there could be more turbulence ahead. The union representing Air Canada pilots is preparing for a possible strike next month. Business reporter Kyle Bax has that story.
The pilots are frustrated right now.
Pilots at Air Canada are beginning to wear lanyards and pins with the message "Strike Ready." The union and airline have been at the bargaining table for more than a year. The head of the union, Charlene Hoodie, says the big issues include scheduling and compensation.
We've seen a large gap between ourselves and our American counterparts. Right now, some of my American counterparts are making twice as much as I do and the pilots that I represent.
Pilots are now voting on whether to give their union a strike mandate. They've been without a contract since September. Negotiations have included a mediator.
We are far apart.
The airline says it hopes to finalize a deal over the next several weeks. Any job action would be the latest headache for travelers this year, following the sudden closure of Lynx Air, a strike by WestJet mechanics, and severe weather damaging the terminal and planes at Calgary's airport.
There's seemingly some kind of a crisis going on somewhere. It's just the nature of the airline sector here in Canada.
Rick Erickson is an aviation analyst.
Clearly, pilots at Air Canada have watched other pilots at other airlines, particularly in the United States, gain very substantive benefits.
The earliest the union could strike is September 17th. Kyle Bax, CBC News, Calgary.
Katy Perry's music video for this song is getting her into trouble in Spain. The video shows her partying in Ibiza and enjoying the beaches in Formentera. But some of the scenes appear to have been filmed in the middle of an ecologically protected dune. And a statement from the Spanish government says she did not get permission to record there. The country's resource management group is investigating and says she's not being accused of crimes against the environment yet. That's World Report. I'm Marcia Young.
Good morning, Manitoba. You're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1. I'm Emily Brass, filling in for Marcy Marcusa. Here's what's coming up on the show. The head of the RCMP's union wants that force to become the de facto precinct in charge of Parliament Hill instead of sharing the jurisdiction with other police forces. We'll take a closer look at that debate. It turns out that getting your eyes checked might be good for your brain health, among other things. Dr. Raj Bhardwaj brings us the latest on dementia risk factors from a recently published report. But first, if your pet could talk, what do you think it would say? We'll meet the author of a book that sees the world through the eyes of her cats. All that and more coming up on Information Radio. 11 minutes after 6 o'clock, time for news headlines with Josh Crabb.
Good morning. A family who fled missiles in the skies over Ukraine has been attacked with baseball bats in the streets of Winnipeg. It happened on the afternoon of August 3rd. A mother and her 14-year-old son were badly beaten in an unprovoked daylight assault in the Elmwood, East Kildonan area. The sister of a 15-year-old attacked with a machete says her brother's skull is fractured and he's on bed rest after a 20-hour surgery. She says it happened when the teen was walking with some friends on Selkirk Avenue near Aikens after a soccer game Saturday night. And library hours in Winnipeg are set to expand starting this fall, but one parent in Fort Garry says her local branch is losing out. Find out why coming up in your next local CBC News at 6:30.
Well, thank you, Josh, and good morning to you.
Good morning. Thank you.
That's Josh Crabb from the CBC Manitoba News Desk. Abby Adiemi joins us now with a look at the weather. Good morning, Abby.
Good morning. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing well. A little tired, but not bad.
I guess the cold snap is going to bring you out of that.
Oh, yes, that's true.
Looking across the province, we're expecting mainly cloudy skies today, unlike yesterday that we saw sunny conditions. Though we'll see a mix of sun and clouds somewhere in between. Showers and thunderstorm in the forecast are likely in many areas with breezy and light winds and humidity factored in. We will be seeing temperatures ranging from 12 degrees to 31 and then cooling off to lows of around 18 to 16 tonight. Currently in Winnipeg, it is 19. It is clear. Some cloudy spots here and there. We should be seeing mainly cloudy skies today with a slight chance of showers this morning into the afternoon period, along with a risk of thunderstorms being felt in some areas. Some breezy conditions will be felt also, and then we will warm up to 28. However, it's going to be feeling closer to 33 with the humidity factored in. And if you look at other regions up north, we still have that air quality advisory in effect due to the wildfire smoke and the heat warning for Churchill. Thompson at 12, Churchill at 16. Smoky conditions I see right now. Brandon is clear at 15. Dauphin is under a severe thunderstorm watch, so you should watch out for that. You're currently at 12 degrees, while for Gimli, Steinbach, Morris, all cloudy and seen partly overcast at 19 degrees. So if you look at the summary today, it's going to be cloudy skies with showers and the forecast expected across the province, and temperatures we should be seeing it from like 12 degrees to 31. Light, windy and breezy conditions in most areas. Right now in Winnipeg, 19 degrees.
Thank you, Abby.
Thank you.
And joining me now in the studio with a look at the traffic, which, is not too heavy at this hour, but still, May McKillop's looking at the roads for us.
The commuter line is open.
It's open.
It's open.
Taking your calls.
I'm standing by, ready to call or ready to receive a call. I haven't heard anything so far, but if anyone is seeing anything getting in their way and they want to let their fellow listeners know, the number to call is 204-788-3093.
Coming up on 6:15, and you're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM and 990 AM in Winnipeg. Just want to give you a heads up that we are going to have some maintenance on our 990 AM signal from the Springsteen Tower. It's going to be off the air, and that's for tower maintenance and to repair the lights. So the outage will begin just after our morning show at 8:45, and it should be done by 6 p.m. Well, pets that come into our lives can leave their paw prints on our souls. For Lisa Erickson, cats have been part of her life since childhood. She loved the many felines that have come and gone, and now she's honoring those cats through her writing and exploring the world through their eyes. Erickson is a former teacher and author of the book No Ordinary Cats. She lives on a farm near Lyleton, and CBC's Shanalee Vidal spoke with Erickson this past April about her book, which has been 30 years in the making.
I felt I had really accomplished something, not only for myself, but for the cats whose lives I wanted to honor. I still remember the morning when I actually typed the final words, "the end," on my first draft. I knew I had, mountains of work to do after that, but that felt like I'd really done something.
Can you tell us about the cat that actually inspired the book?
Yeah, Chairman Meow was his name. He was a dapper and handsome tabby. And after his passing, I found that in order for it to make sense to me, I needed to write down what had happened during his life, events that I knew had happened, and other events that I had imagined. And once I had finished writing about Chairman, I realized that all the other cats that had owned me over many years had interesting lives and fascinating stories, and they all deserved a voice too.
I love how you said had owned me over the years because, yes, every cat parent knows that.
Absolutely.
Who are the rest of the cats? Can you tell us about some of them?
I can, yeah. The story begins, even though I had written it backwards from Chairman Meow's story to the beginning, the story begins with Max, who initially belonged to my mom. Max and Mom had moved to a larger center, and Max, being a country cat, didn't appreciate that, and she came down to live with us. And my boys, very young at the time, absolutely adored her. Following Max were Riser and Dilly, and following them were Angel, Bandit, Moonsy, Fluffity, Chuck, Chairman, and the two that I currently have, Misty and Smokey, along with some new kittens. Their mom adopted me last summer and had 5 babies.
What is it about cats that you love so much?
I love their personalities. I love the fact that you never know for sure what they're thinking. You know, we like to think that our pets love us as much as, you know, we obviously love them. But I think the thing that I admire most about them is their independence, their ability to walk their own walk, wave their own tail the way the world, you know, appeals to them. And some of their characteristics I wish I had in more abundance.
Any person who's had cats, many cats over their lives, they know that each cat has had its own unique personality. Mm-hmm. Some are more outgoing, some are a little bit more jokesters.
Yes.
So it's really interesting that you've taken all those personalities and put them in this book. I'm wondering, how did you get yourself into the mind of a cat?
That was a little hard. It was a little bit of a challenge, I will admit that, but I wanted to make my story accessible to a reader, assuming that they could understand that a cat was telling them this story. And in this classroom sessions that I do with students, that is part of the writing piece, where we sit down and we talk about what are some of the traits or some of the characteristics that you can include in your writing that will make a reader believe that you are that specific animal.
How did those writing sessions go?
They went very well. Easier with the older kids perhaps than the younger ones, but even the younger ones could dive inside the head of a pet that they loved dearly and think about some of the character traits that they possessed and some of the things that they knew that pet had done and describe it from that animal's point of view.
So I read the first story, and that was about Max. Mm-hmm. And, it talked about, Max, oh no, I'm going to be, shoved into this carrier. And it actually brought out a few tears in me. What kind of emotions are you hoping to evoke from readers with this book?
Well, I'm hoping not only just for cat people, but just for animal lovers everywhere, that we acknowledge the importance of our pets in our lives. And I don't think it matters, whether you had a fish, a guinea pig, whatever your animal, your pet of choice is, they all stamp their, impact on our hearts, and we all are devastated when they die.
Oh, yeah, always hard to lose a pet. That was Manitoban Lisa Erickson, who is author of the book No Ordinary Cats.
Actual results may vary. Do not expose to rain. Batteries not included. Keep away from flame. Any resemblance to a real person is purely coincidental. May explode or leak. If enhancement lasts more than 4 hours, see your doctor. Do not try this at home. Remove child before washing. May cause looseness. Subject to change without notice. Do not use while sleeping. Some parts not included. Do not iron clothes on body. No purchase necessary. Do not put swab into your ear. Fine print and advertising disclaimers on Under the Influence with Terry O'Reilly. Thursday morning at 11:30, 3:30 p.m. in Newfoundland. And on the CBC Listen app.
20 minutes after 6 o'clock, you're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM in Winnipeg and around the world on our CBC Manitoba YouTube channel, broadcasting live right now from the studio. You can also check us out on the CBC Listen app as well as on our website. Well, this summer, we've seen an attempted assassination of a United States presidential candidate. And last week, a man was charged with making violent threats against Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. It's all prompting the president of the National Police Federation, Brian Sauvé, to say that Parliament Hill needs a security upgrade. He's pushing for the RCMP to have jurisdiction over the parliamentary precinct, but not everyone involved is in agreement. To learn more, we're joined by Laura Osmond. She's the federal politics reporter with the Canadian Press. Good morning, Laura.
Good morning, Emily.
So let's start with some context. Like, how does security currently work on Parliament Hill, and what are the different groups at play here?
Yeah, so if you start with sort of the streets around Parliament Hill, including the main sort of street that runs right in front of Parliament Hill, Wellington Street, that's policed by the Ottawa Police like any other street in Ottawa. And then as you get closer to the hill, closer to the buildings, you'll see the Parliamentary Protective Service. These guys are kind of like the security guards of the Parliament buildings. You know, as politicians are going in the doors, they're checking badges, they're inside, they're making sure all's well. And then you'll see the odd RCMP officer. Typically, they are, acting as a security detail for a particular politician, an increasing number of politicians. They're also the ones that the Parliamentary Protective Service would call if there was a major national security emergency on the Hill. And so these three agencies are kind of working together. They're sharing intelligence, and depending on the threat level, one or more of them will be responding.
And so what are the challenges with the system, and how do these play into Sauvé's argument?
Well, as you can imagine, with three different agencies, there's sometimes some confusion because not everything fits neatly into a particular bucket, right? If it's a local policing issue, it would be the Ottawa Police. If it's a national security issue, it would be the RCMP. If it's something that doesn't require an arrest, it would be the Parliamentary Protective Service. But not everything is so straightforward, and also things evolve. And so we've seen, for example, with the Freedom Convoy 2 years ago, that was initially up to the Ottawa Police Service to respond. But as the protest grew and stayed longer and was causing more problems, they had to bring, police officers in from other jurisdictions. There was questions about who should be leading this response, whether it should, whether it sort of rose to a national security threat that the RCMP should take over. So there was some confusion there, and that's not super efficient and takes away a little bit from the response. As well, about 10 years ago, we had the shooting of Nathan Cirillo at the National War Memorial, which saw a gunman walking the halls of Parliament. And there was a review after that raised issues with having several different agencies involved and some of the confusion that causes. The Parliamentary Protective Service, those are the guys who are actually standing on Parliament Hill next to the Parliament buildings. They don't have the power to arrest. So if something serious is happening, they need to call in for support. And as far as Ottawa Police is concerned, they have to bring in resources from elsewhere in the city if something big is happening on Parliament Hill. We have an increasing number of protests happening, increasing number of incidents on the Hill, and that's taking away from policing elsewhere in the city. And so you can see where the police union's argument is coming from, that they're looking for a more efficient solution.
But the RCMP commissioner, Mike Duham, has said he's not keen on the plan. So what's driving the police union to push towards this change in structure?
Yeah, you can see how it would be more efficient if there's a major emergency to have trained RCMP officers at the ready to respond. But what they're suggesting is having 200, 300 RCMP officers sort of create a detachment on Parliament Hill. The issue, of course, is that 90% of the time, everything's great on Parliament Hill. The politicians are coming and going. We have tourists all over the place. People in Ottawa are going about their daily lives. You maybe don't need 200 or 300 highly trained RCMP officers just kind of sitting at the ready for the national security issue to arise. And so that is why the RCMP is arguing that the system is working pretty well as it is. The RCMP union isn't necessarily going to see the issue with having 200, 300 RCMP officers sitting around, but for the service itself, that's a pretty massive cost.
Of course, the RCMP is also parsing through some internal responsibility debates. How does that play out here?
Yeah, I think the RCMP has a bit of an identity crisis that it's going through. It's been going through it for some time. They're still trying to figure it out. They're the National Police Service. They're supposed to be dealing with things that involve national security, but they're also being contracted in several communities all over Canada to offer community policing. And so the RCMP officers act as community police officers in a particular town. And so, the question is, well, should those resources be used to essentially be community beat cops, or should they be really focused on national security investigations and response? And so I think this feeds into that debate a little bit. Do we want RCMP officers to be acting as parliamentary beat cops when they could instead be really focused on emergency responses?
So, Laura, do you think this is a valid solution, or, are there other options? What do you think needs to change?
Well, it's certainly been, it's certainly a valid option in the sense that it's been raised several times in response to emergencies like the Freedom Convoy, like the shooting of Nathan Cirillo 10 years ago. It's not the only solution, though. There have been other ideas raised, including giving more powers to the Parliamentary Protective Service. Right now, they don't have the power to arrest. Perhaps you give them some more powers, give them the option to arrest. It's also been raised that they could expand the parliamentary precinct to include some of the streets around Parliament Hill to give them a little bit more jurisdiction, which would then essentially mean that Ottawa Police maybe wouldn't have to respond as often. I think Ottawa Police has asked for more money from the federal government, given that there's an increased number of protests and incidents happening around the Hill. And so that's another solution, is to create sort of an Ottawa detachment that would be dedicated to the Hill that the federal government could fund. These conversations have been going on for a long, long time, and we haven't really had strong definitive solutions. And I think part of the reason comes down to cost, frankly.
And of course, we're having this conversation in large part because of the perception that it's getting more dangerous for politicians to do their jobs right now. From your perspective, what's the overall threat level, and are we taking the issue of safety on Parliament Hill seriously enough?
I mean, it's certainly higher than I think it's ever been. I mean, even in the last few years since the pandemic, we've seen an increased number of politicians of all political stripes needing to be followed around by their own security detail. We have politicians walking around with panic buttons in their pockets, increasing online threats as we become sort of more polarized as a country. And in the last few weeks alone, we've seen 2 separate arrests related to threats against the Prime Minister. I think that these threats aren't sort of isolated on Parliament Hill. They follow these politicians around wherever they go, including their constituency offices. So this is a much bigger issue than just Parliament Hill. But the Parliament Hill issue does need to be resolved, given that, the number of protests, the intensity of protests are increasing. The flip side of that is that in Canada, we have a society where we can have our politicians kind of walk amongst the crowds. I don't know how many times I've watched the Prime Minister sort of wade through a crowd, taking photos with people, shaking hands. That's something that's becoming uniquely Canadian, and I don't think something that we necessarily want to lose in terms of being able to have a one-on-one personal connection with our elected officials. And as we increase the security, there's obviously more separation between Canadians and our politicians. And so I think that it's a fine line that everyone's trying to walk here so that we don't lose that really kind of special thing where politicians feel safe enough to be among the people who elected them.
A lot to think about there. Thanks for joining us this morning, Laura.
Thanks so much for having me, Emily.
Laura Osman is a federal politics reporter with the Canadian Press. Well, still to come in the next half hour, Starbucks has replaced its CEO after just 17 months. What's behind that decision? Crystalie Ramlakan will join us after the news with the CBC Business Report. The news is next.
This is CBC News. At 6:30, it's partly cloudy and 19 in downtown Winnipeg, partly cloudy and 15 in Brandon, foggy and 12 in Thompson. Good morning, I'm Josh Crabb. The sister of a 15-year-old attacked with a machete says he sustained life-changing injuries. He had a 20-hour surgery where he had nerves reattached on his hands, legs, back, and face. She says the teen was walking with some friends on Selkirk Avenue near Aikens after a soccer game Saturday night. The sister says the group came across an intoxicated woman and offered to help. He was then chased by the accused, robbed, kicked, and then attacked with the machete.
We don't know how, but he has a skull fracture, but no bleeding or bruising in the brain. It's a complete miracle he's in the condition he is. And, they missed all his vital organs, but, at the same time, the severity of the attack and the fact that his perpetrator was only charged with aggravated assault, to me, that's sickening. It's insulting.
The teen is on bed rest now. The accused, another 15-year-old boy, is charged with aggravated assault. A family who fled missiles in the skies over Ukraine has been attacked with baseball bats in the streets of Winnipeg. A mother and her 14-year-old son were badly beaten in an unprovoked daylight assault in the Elmwood, East Kildonan area. It happened on the afternoon of August 3rd. Two men in their 20s face numerous charges. The boy remains in hospital with severe injuries. Joanne Lewandowski is the president of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress in Manitoba.
We have a strong Ukrainian community, and we are a very welcoming province. They've come here to start a new life. They're looking for safety. And I have to say, I'm not too sure if there is that much safety.
The attack happened a few blocks away from a fatal stabbing last December. The victim in that case was a Ukrainian immigrant who was on his way to work. A Canadian organization, meantime, is raising money to help build Ukraine's largest children's hospital, to rebuild it. It was destroyed last month during a series of deadly strikes by Russia. The assault interrupted heart surgeries, and it forced children undergoing cancer treatment and dialysis to run for cover. Ithel Musa has more.
Imagine we as Canadians, as Torontonians, lose the ability to have sick kids.
Valery Kostuk is the executive director of the Canada-Ukraine Foundation. His organization is trying to help Ukraine's biggest children's hospital rebuild after a deadly missile strike in early July. Oksana Fomenyuk's 16-year-old daughter, Solomia, was undergoing life-saving dialysis treatment when the Akhmedet hospital in Kiev was struck. Video footage shows the teen carried out on a stretcher, covered in blood. Russia denies being behind the attack, but the United Nations says there's a high likelihood it was one of their missiles. Meanwhile, the hospital says it's continuing to provide care despite the challenges of a brutal war. Ithel Musa, CBC News, Toronto.
Back here at home, library hours in Winnipeg are set to expand starting this fall, but one parent in Fort Garry says her local branch is losing out. Carla Epp takes her kids to the library in the mornings, but the Fort Garry Library branch is expected to lose 3 mornings as opening hours are pushed back from 10 a.m. to noon. For Epp and her kids, that means fewer opportunities to take out books and access programming.
If you look at libraries across the country, we are poorly funded, poorly resourced. We have far fewer programs. We just don't offer nearly as much. And it's one of the few free things, free resources, free places. It's an equalizer for people.
A report last fall found Winnipeggers were frustrated by inconsistent and confusing hours at library branches. The changes take effect September 3rd and will increase library hours overall by 12%. Turning to sports, Winnipeg Blue Bombers star receiver Kenny Lawler returned to the field this week after breaking his arm in the team's season-opening loss. Lawler says he's good to go for the team's next game Sunday in BC against the Lions, but head coach Mike O'Shea says it's not guaranteed Lawler will play. O'Shea says a decision will be made after a week of practice. Meantime, the Lions could have newly signed Canadian quarterback Nathan Rourke in the lineup. And there will be a service interruption later this morning on CBC Radio's 990 AM signal due to tower maintenance west of Winnipeg. The outage will begin at 8:45 this morning, and the repairs are expected to be completed by 6 tonight. Meantime, on Friday, people listening on 89.3 FM will experience a service interruption between 8:45 and 6 because of tower maintenance downtown. During the outages, you can tune in on an alternate signal or the Listen app at cbc.ca/listen. And that is the CBC News from Winnipeg. Your next local news is at 7:30.
And in the case of the morning show, Josh, you can also check out our CBC Manitoba YouTube channel if you haven't yet and look at the show while you're listening.
That's right. Good point.
Thank you so much.
You bet.
That's CBC's Josh Crabb, who was joining us from the newsroom. You're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1. I'm Emily Brass in this week for Marcy Marcusa. Time now for a look at the forecast with Abby Adiemi.
Good morning, Em. Across the province, we're expecting a mix of sun and clouds today. Showers and thunderstorm in the forecast, with temperatures climbing all the way to 31. Conditions will be breezy and light in most areas, and we have that risk of thunderstorm staying in almost all the regions. Winnipeg at 19 at the moment. We're seeing partly cloudy skies. We're expecting these mainly cloudy conditions to stay with us today. We have a slim chance of showers and a risk of thunderstorm in the forecast. Highs will get to 28, though with a humidex factored in, we'll be getting to 33. Brandon is sitting at 15 and mostly clear at this time. We're looking for mostly cloudy conditions for the day. A good chance of showers for that region and thunderstorms in the forecast, so you will feel it roll by. We'll see highs near 23. Moving on to Thompson, it is currently 12 degrees. We're seeing shallow fog. Earlier it was clear, but that fog is making its presence felt. You should be expecting a mix of sun and clouds with increasing clouds and a good chance of showers and thunderstorm later in the day. High will be near 26. Further north in Churchill, it is 16 and smoky at this time with poor air quality. And the forecast includes that widespread smoke with high near 31, feeling like 36. So you need to take care because there's also a heat warning in effect. Dauphin is under a severe thunderstorm watch at 18 degrees at this time. It is mostly cloudy. We're expecting mainly cloudy conditions to stay with folks in that region. A high chance of showers and a risk of thunderstorms in the forecast. Highs are near 24. And for tonight, partly cloudy conditions still in the region. That good chance of showers will continue with that thunderstorm still staying with you for most of the day. Gimli's at 19 and cloudy. For the Interlake region today, we will see mainly cloudy conditions with a slim chance of showers and thunderstorm in the forecast. High 27. Steinbach is currently seeing cloudy conditions at this time. At 19 degrees, we'll see this cloudy conditions stay with you for the most of the day. A slim chance of showers and a risk of thunderstorm. Highs will be near 28. And for folks in Morris, you are at 18 degrees and partly cloudy. Morning to our friends in the Pembina Valley region. For you, you'll be getting mainly cloudy skies with a slim chance of showers increasing later with a risk of thunderstorms. Highs of 27. And then tonight, cloudy conditions and some showers you'll see tonight, plus a thunderstorm and light winds. Then you cool off to 17. For most regions, it's just going to be a cloudy day, a good chance of showers and thunderstorm, and we'll see lows later near 18 degrees. But right now, Winnipeg, we are at 19 degrees.
So a little break from all the humidity, a little moisture coming. We could use that.
Yes, for folks in the north, we are really looking for that.
Yes, hopefully it cuts down on the smoke and the fires. Thank you so much, Abby.
Thank you.
That's CBC's Abby Adiemi. And now with a look at the roads is May McKillop. Good morning.
Hey, Emily. So we got a tip about the Osborne Village near the new apartment complex being built.
Okay.
There are construction barricades up and the median lane is closed northbound Osborne just past Confusion Corner.
Oh,
so
boy.
this is making traffic move pretty slow already. So remember to zipper merge with your fellow commuters. And if there's anything else you're seeing out there, or if you want to give me an update on that area, I would love to hear it. Give me a call, 204-788-3093.
Yes, and we just got a tip that actually it's the southbound direction where the problem is. And yes, we love to see a good zipper merge. Cheers to all the drivers who are doing that well. It is now 6:39. You're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM and 990 AM in Winnipeg. I'm Emily Brass. And it's time now for some business news. Crystalie Ramlakan joins us with the CBC Business Report. Good morning, Crystalie.
Hey, good morning, Emily.
So Canada's telecommunications regulator is making moves in an attempt to lower the price of internet services. That's probably pretty welcome. What are the details?
Yes, so the CRTC is expanding a decision that allows smaller internet providers to use rivals' fiber networks to offer their services to customers. Starting in February, large companies that own fiber internet networks, such as Bell and Telus, must give competitors access to their networks for a fee. Now, this builds on a ruling late last year that temporarily required Bell and Telus to provide competitors with access just in Ontario and Quebec. And the decision was meant to stimulate competition. But Bell responded by reducing its network spending, saying the ruling diminished the business case for it to invest. But, the latest decision only applies to existing networks. Any new fiber will be made available to competitors down the road in 5 years in order to give big telecoms a chance to make a return on their investments. Now, more competition generally leads to better prices, but it's unclear what the uptake will be because companies don't know how much the access fee will cost yet. So for more on this, here's Dwayne Winsek, who is a professor of communication and journalism at Carleton University.
Generally, it's a good news story that takes some of the independent ISPs that are remaining, like Tech Savvy, off of life support and gives them a shot at being viable over the long run. There's some details to be tidied up around what the exact pricing arrangements for this wholesale access regime are going to be. But overall, it's a decent story, and it builds on an effective decision that the CRTC put in place last year.
And the CRTC says it will set new rates by the end of the year.
Meanwhile, as I sip my coffee, I'm reading this news that Starbucks has replaced its CEO after just 17 months. What's behind that decision?
Yeah, well, Starbucks has been struggling with weak demand and disgruntled investors, so its CEO is stepping down. Brian Niccol, the CEO of Chipotle, will become the new CEO on September 9th. So shares of Starbucks soared after this announcement yesterday, and the coffee giant has also been dealing with more competition from lower-cost competitors and boycotts due to its perceived support for Israel. So its stock has lost roughly 20% of its value over the last 5 years. Barry Schwartz is a chief investment officer at Baskin Wealth Management. He says it's actually remarkable that Starbucks was able to attract a superstar CEO, given the great challenges confronting the company.
I think Starbucks is going to probably transform more into a food company and with better offerings. And I think that's the tell. They're not hiring a guy with coffee experience. They're hiring a person who knows how to run stores efficiently, as well as really have exciting products that satisfy customers. And I think that's what Starbucks has been lacking in the last few years, to be honest with you.
And the chair of the board of directors says Niccol has transformed Chipotle since becoming its CEO in 2018 by focusing on menu innovation, operational excellence, and digital transformation. Prior to that, Niccol was the CEO of Taco Bell.
And Costco now is cracking down on people who borrow membership cards.
Yes, but just in a handful of Canadian cities for now. So I think Manitoba is safe for right now. The retailer is testing a new membership scanning system, and the scanners, which were announced last week, are going to be set up at entrances in Ottawa, Edmonton, Regina, and BC's Lower Mainland. And the new system will be expanded to other stores, but the company hasn't confirmed whether it will be expanded to all locations in the country. So members will have to scan their memberships to enter the store, and if your card doesn't have a photo, you will need to be prepared to show your photo ID as well. Guests are still allowed, but only if they're accompanied by someone who holds a valid membership. And it's not the first time the store has tightened rules. The company began asking customers to show photo ID along with their memberships last year, alleging that non-members were abusing self-checkouts. So it has also restricted non-members from their food courts and, of course, those $1.50 hot dogs. And this follows other companies cracking down on people sharing accounts, including Netflix and Disney+.
Not the hot dogs, Crystalie.
I know. It's a pretty good deal.
So what's happening in the market so far?
In Europe, markets are higher as investors monitor key inflation reports. Germany, the UK, and France are all up. In Asia, markets are mostly on the rise. Right now, Japan is up. Shanghai and Hong Kong are both down. Oil is down 28 cents to 78.07 US per barrel. Gold is up 340 to $2,511.30 US per ounce. And the dollar is up 0.03 of a cent to 73 cents US.
Thank you, Crystalie.
Thanks, Emily.
That was Crystalie Ramlakan with the CBC Business News. You've likely heard about dry January, but how about aiming to stay digitally dry? It's an idea called digital sobriety, born at a think tank in France and now appearing across the Atlantic in blogs and articles here. It asks people to cut back on their use of technology to reduce their digital carbon footprint. But what does it mean to be digitally sober? And can it really make a difference? Our tech columnist Manjula Sevalraja takes a look.
Over a decade ago, a group in France called the Green IT Collective started popularizing the expression digital sobriety, or la sobriété numérique. The founder of the organization even published a book on the topic addressing the growing carbon footprint of over 650 million pieces of digital equipment in France. He preached that people should practice restraint in their digital lives for the sake of the environment. Daria Marchenko is very interested in the idea. She is the Montreal-based founder of the Ecoist Club, a project she created to tackle digital pollution.
But I would say that digital sobriety, it's a concept that put together several thoughts, ideas, and practices that helps to reduce social and environmental impact of digital consumption.
Marchenko created an app, Ecoist Club, to help people calculate their digital carbon footprint and learn ways to reduce it. As an exercise, she worked to make the app itself a low digital polluter.
If you download my app, you're not supposed to create any account, so we don't track any data. We very low impact solution.
But Marchenko doesn't want to put all of the onus for change on the individual.
It would be totally wrong. But the idea is that we build this world, this digital world together, and it's very difficult to build it together when a huge part of participants just don't know how it works. So it's invisible. You cannot open your iPhone. You don't know how it happens. All the data transmission is invisible. So it's all it's a big mystery with a huge impact. And our idea was to somehow bring people together and just start thinking about it.
There are several tips floating around the internet on how to reduce one's digital carbon footprint. Cut down on your group emails to people. Stop sending those thank you replies. Switch off the video in online meetings. Reduce your screen time.
I see a lot of tips that are shared that are not necessarily impactful, that sort of are, they look good on paper, but when you look deeper into it, you're like, oh, it's almost counterproductive to go into those habits.
Martin Darren works at the University of Montreal as the project lead for Chemin de Transition, or Transition Pathways. The initiative explores how Quebec can change and grow sustainably. A 2022 paper from Quebec looked at the real weight of one commonly proposed tip: sending fewer emails and deleting old ones. The researchers from the University of Quebec at Chicoutimi and the École de Technologie Supérieure in Montreal found that it didn't have much of an impact.
They calculated that deleting about 1,000 emails from your server, if you're here in Quebec, it will save about 5 grams of CO2 equivalent. However, spending half an hour on a computer, which might be the time that you need to delete those 1,000 emails, you end up generating about 5 grams of CO2 equivalent. So the whole time that you spent, in the end, didn't matter a whole lot.
Darren, Daria Marchenko, and other experts point to the biggest emitter in our digital lives: the manufacturing of our gadgets.
The amount of time that we use them for in the end, ends up representing a small percentage of the environmental impact. So when we import, let's say, a phone, a smartphone, or a computer, we estimate that between 60 to 80% of the impacts have already been produced through the manufacturing of those devices.
So, what is the biggest impact you can make? Darren says we should target our consumption of gadgets.
Anything we can do to try to keep our devices longer. So yeah, repairing them, cleaning them, maintaining them, having like good digital health. And if we need to acquire new equipment, well, try to ask yourself if you really need it. If you get new ones, making sure that you get some that are more durable and that can be more repairable. That's really key.
Daria Marchenko and Martin Darren think the larger idea of digital sobriety still matters. It's about using technology in a mindful way, balancing the environmental impact of one's choices against any economic or social benefits. For CBC Radio, I'm Manjula Selvarajah.
Wow, who knew that unread emails were having a carbon footprint? I feel kind of guilty now. Could you do it? They're so addictive, these cell phones. Could you go digitally sober? Give us a call on our listener line. Let us know if you're interested in that, if you think it's too challenging. That number is 204-788-3205. 10 minutes now before 7 o'clock. You're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1. I'm Emily Brass. As Canada's population ages, doctors are seeing more people with dementia. The Alzheimer's Society of Canada estimates that nearly 1 million Canadians will be living with dementia by 2030 in just over 5 years' time. But worsening brain function doesn't always have to go along with aging. A new report published in the medical journal The Lancet reviewed some hopeful evidence on preventing dementia. Our regular health and medicine specialist, Dr. Raj Bhardwaj, has more details. Hi, Raj.
Good morning, Emily.
So what sorts of dementia risk factors did this report look at?
Yeah, they looked at a bunch of risk factors. And, it's important because the Lancet Commission on Dementia figures that about 45% of dementia basically happens because of risk factors that we can control to some degree. And, a lot of them are not super surprising if you think of the damage they can do to your body in different ways. So risk factors like having diabetes, smoking, alcohol use, high blood pressure, carrying excess weight, or being relatively inactive, right? Now, those are also risk factors for heart disease and other problems too. And then there's risk factors that I sort of think of as environmental or maybe social risk factors, like higher air pollution is a risk factor for dementia, lower education level is too, and increased social isolation is also linked to developing dementia as you age. And then there are other risk factors like depression and hearing loss, both of which can lead to more social isolation. And of course, concussions, which can change the connections in your brain. Those make sense too. In this report, expert authors added vision loss as another risk factor for dementia, as well as high cholesterol.
Wow, that's quite a range of risks. Let's dig into those a bit more, starting with vision loss. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so it kind of makes sense when you think about, when you talk to people and say, well, what are you doing to keep your brain sharp? And they say, oh, well, I do crossword puzzles or I read books or something like that. Well, if your vision deteriorates as you age, then it's harder to engage in those activities. It's also harder to engage in social activities, right? Which is a risk factor for dementia. So it can also, of course, add to a person's general stress level if they can't see. And it can be a big factor in depression for people. So just like hearing loss, it sort of hits your brain from a bunch of different angles when it comes to dementia risk factors. Now, there's a couple of common causes of vision loss as people age, and the experts found that there were a couple that were specifically related to increased dementia risk. So one is cataracts. A cataract is what happens when the lens of your eye goes cloudy and you can't see through it anymore. Now, we can remove the lens and put in an artificial lens, which is nice and clear, and then you can see again. And there's actually evidence that people with cataracts have a higher risk of dementia than people without cataracts. But if they get their cataract operated on, then they do not have a higher risk of dementia. So super interesting. Another vision risk factor for dementia as you age is the eye changes that go along with diabetes. So that's called diabetic retinopathy. That one's a bit more complicated because it's sometimes hard to tell, how much of the risk is from the diabetes itself and how much is from the vision loss associated with the diabetes. But studies were able to control for the severity of diabetes in people, and it turns out that the vision loss is a risk factor on its own. So of course, it's really important to control your diabetes as much as possible for its own sake, but also for the sake of preserving your vision, which then helps to keep your brain active and makes it more likely that you will continue to be socially engaged. And those are all protective factors.
And of course, another new risk factor was high cholesterol. What is the link there with dementia?
Yeah, so the commission actually looked at high cholesterol as a risk factor back in 2020, the last time they put out a report like this. But back then, the evidence was inconclusive. So since then, there have been more studies published looking at over 1 million people under the age of 65. And those studies have consistently shown that higher levels of LDL, so sort of the quote-unquote bad cholesterol, are associated with higher risk of developing dementia as you age. But on the flip side, higher levels of the good cholesterol, HDL, is actually protective against dementia. And if you take cholesterol meds to lower your bad cholesterol, that's also protective. So I think that it's important to think about that a little bit. You know, the consequences of the cholesterol was more profound in younger people, you know, relatively, so under age 65. We've known that cholesterol is a risk factor for, you know, heart attacks and strokes, and it does its damage over time. So it's not just about, you know, sort of, you know, looking at the risk factors that people have once they're older, but also the risk factors that people have sort of as they age.
Yeah, interesting. And you mentioned that the effect of high cholesterol was bigger in younger people. What does that mean for dementia prevention overall?
Yeah, you know, I think a lot of people think of dementia as a problem for future me, you know, that you know, this is a problem that happens to older people, which is generally true. But remember that it develops over time and it's very, very slow. And so, you know, if you can control the risk factors now with present you, no matter what your age, then you're going to have, you know, hopefully much better life, you know, for future you. So that's not just about cholesterol levels, but it really for all the risk factors. So if you're young, let's say, you know, you're in your teens or 20s and listening to this and saying, this is a problem for future me. Yeah, you know what? Grab as much education as you can now, because that's protective for future you. Get into the habit of staying active, staying fit, avoid head injuries from things like contact sports, because those are all protective for future you. Don't start smoking. And if you do, stop now, because the benefits sort of are bigger the sooner you stop. Don't drink too much alcohol and don't drink too often. And then, you know, in your middle age, you know, it's important to take the time, make the effort to stay physically active, stay socially active and engaged. But then also start checking on things that you might not really notice that much. You know, get your vision checked, get your hearing checked, get your cholesterol checked, get your blood pressure checked, things like that, and work on keeping all of those things in a healthy range, whether that's with diet and lifestyle or with medications if needed. And then as you get older and you start to contemplate retirement, you know, contemplate and really plan to fill your time with other socially, mentally, physically engaging activities and people other than, you know, sort of dropping out of your job and all of a sudden losing all of that, you know. And if you can do that with other people, then you can help each other to stay healthy and stay sharp as you age as well. And if you start today with whatever you can, then future you is going to be super happy that present you took the time and effort to do that.
Okay, I'm going to get to work on that. Thank you, Raj.
My pleasure.
That's our house doctor, Raj Bardwaj. And right now in the studio, Josh Crabb is here with the CBC Manitoba News headlines.
Good morning. The sister of a 15-year-old attacked with a machete says it's a miracle her brother is alive. The teen was walking with friends on Selkirk near Aikens after a soccer game Saturday night when he was robbed and assaulted. And a Winnipeg parent is frustrated her local library is set to cut its hours back, even as the city prepares to increase library hours overall across the system. Your next local CBC News is at 7:30.
Thank you, Josh.
You're welcome.
Well, still to come on Information Radio, designer bags, high-end denim. You can find it all at Winnipeg thrift stores. And later on the show, we'll find out how. As well, COVID-19 cases are surging in the U.S. We'll speak to an epidemiologist on how we can prepare for an increase in COVID cases as school returns in session. You're listening to Information Radio. World Report is next.
Today on The Current.
Russia is now evacuating residents from a second border region as Ukraine continues its surprise offensive.
I'm Susan Bonner. Ukraine says it has captured more than 1,000 square kilometers of Russian territory after launching an incursion over the border last week. Why some are seeing this surprise attack as a turning point. That's coming up on The Current.
The Current, this morning at 8:37, 9:07 in Newfoundland, and on the CBC Listen app.
This is World Report. Good morning. I'm Marcia Young. The Ukrainian offensive is rapidly spreading across Russia as it enters its second week. It began with a surprise attack on the Kursk region, and overnight, a wave of Ukrainian drone strikes pushed the governor of Belgorod to declare a state of emergency. Anna Cunningham is following developments.
Ukrainian troops advancing further into Russian border towns. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says his troops now control 74 towns and villages in the Kursk region. Russian officials say 120,000 people have already fled the area. Now the offensive is spreading to neighbouring Belgorod. Its governor says Ukrainian shelling is making the situation extremely difficult. US President Joe Biden says he is being briefed daily, every 4 to 5 hours.
It's creating a real dilemma for Putin, and we've been in constant contact with the Ukrainians.
Moscow is scrambling to claw back its territory using drones, missiles and airstrikes.
Fundamentally, this is about politics.
Alex Younger is the former head of Britain's security service, MI6.
Both sides have tried to get what they want through military action over a grinding and bloody 2.5-year period.
Younger says he believes Ukraine's action should get the support of Western countries.
We're heading towards some kind of conversation. We could talk about the risks of this, and they are real, but I think they're justified.
For now, Ukraine shows no sign of withdrawing its troops, adding pressure to Russian forces elsewhere in Ukraine. Anna Cunningham, CBC News, London.
The United States has approved a $20 billion military deal with Israel. The Pentagon says it will allow for the sale of F-15 fighter jets, tank cartridges, mortar cartridges, and Army vehicles. The jets will not be delivered until 2029, but other equipment could begin arriving in Israel by 2026. The U.S. is Israel's biggest weapons supplier. Since the war with Hamas began last October, the U.S. reportedly sent thousands of Hellfire missiles and 2,000-pound bombs to Israel. The Canadian Army has a critical budget shortfall. The Liberal government had promised cutting the internal budget would not affect military readiness, but the money set aside to maintain existing equipment and vehicles is now short, about $150 million. The CBC's Murray Brewster has more.
But what we are committed to do, it is that it does not in any way diminish the capacity of the Canadian Armed Forces to respond to the missions we send them on.
Defence Minister Bill Blair last fall, being given a rough ride before a Commons committee about D&D's planned internal cuts of almost $1 billion. In response to recent questions from CBC News, the Army has acknowledged that its pool of cash for equipment and vehicle maintenance, known as National Procurement Funds, has a shortfall of $150 to $260 million. A statement says that shortfall will mean lower availability for some equipment. At the moment, only 52% of the Army's vehicles and gear are fit to fight. Retired Lieutenant General Andrew Leslie says there's a clear disconnect between what the minister promised and what's happening.
If the minister is under the assumption that they do have enough money to do everything they're supposed to do, he's either misinformed or he's not telling the truth.
Defense analyst Richard Schmuka says the maintenance fund shortfall will likely be felt more at home than in Latvia, where more than 2,000 Canadian troops are on a NATO mission to deter Russia and are expected to be ready to fight.
I think it's serious. It has serious consequences on their operational readiness.
Overall, the Canadian military is getting more money, but that federal budget increase is being eaten up by spending on new big-ticket items, such as F-35s and Navy supply ships. The Defense Department is being forced to cut elsewhere in order to make up the difference. Murray Brewster, CBC News, Ottawa.
Japan's Prime Minister says he will not be running for re-election.
Fumio Kishida making the announcement in Tokyo. He says his decision to step aside is the most obvious way to show his party will change. His Liberal Democratic Party has been marred by controversy, including fundraising scandals. On the streets of Tokyo, some people are applauding Kishida's decision. This man says Kishida likely felt that he had no chance at re-election. He says it's time for a transition of power between generations. Fumio Kishida's approval ratings have plummeted in recent months. Police in New Zealand are trying to track down meth-laced candy. A charity handed out the candy not knowing it was tainted. Up to 400 people may have received the candy as part of a food parcel from the Auckland City Mission. At least 3 people, including a child, had to get medical attention. Glenn Baldwin is a detective inspector with New Zealand Police.
Forensic testing has been carried out with one of the lollies with the confirmation that it is methamphetamine. Police are treating these lollies as fully contaminated until we can prove otherwise. It is vital they are taken out of circulation as soon as possible.
Officials say the candy was sealed in a retail package and was part of an anonymous donation. Police say each one could have a street value of more than 800 Canadian dollars. There is growing evidence Canada is caught in a dangerous climate cycle. Last year's extreme wildfire season drove an increase in global carbon emissions. And international research is warning those increased emissions mean bigger wildfires will be more likely in the future. The CBC's Ben Shingler has the details.
You could say that Canada was record-breaking, or, I'd go as far as saying it's record-shattering in a way. It's completely unprecedented.
Matthew Jones is a climate change researcher at the University of East Anglia in England. His team has been studying last year's wildfires for a new global report in the journal Earth System Science Data, and he says Canada stood out for all the wrong reasons.
We saw almost a decade's worth of fire emissions just in one fire season.
The country set records when it comes to the size of fires, how quickly they spread, and the total area burned, 6 times more than the average since 2001. This summer's wildfire season isn't on pace to be as bad, even with wildfires outside Jasper, Alberta, still burning.
It'll be an ongoing battle for Parks Canada and Alberta Wildfire to deal with for the next few months for sure, into the winter.
And the report found that if we don't cut emissions, extreme wildfire seasons in Canada will be more common, 6 to 11 times more likely by the year 2100.
And so reality is just catching up with what we have been predicting.
The findings aren't a surprise to Zev Gedaloff. He's a forestry researcher at the University of Guelph in Ontario.
The fact that wildfire is increasing and that increase is associated with climate change is something that fire scientists and climate scientists have been saying is going to happen for decades now.
In the decades to come, Gedaloff says it's crucial our forests are better managed and our homes proofed so that these ever-increasing fires have less to fuel them. Ben Shingler, CBC News, Montreal.
The mayor of Jasper, Alberta, says an estimated $238 million worth of property was destroyed by fire. And as people prepare to return to the townsite, officials are getting a handle on how many will need temporary housing. The fires that tore through Jasper destroyed more than 350 homes, buildings, and other structures. But the number of actual housing units that were destroyed totaled about 800. After several months of disruptions for air travelers, there could be more turbulence ahead. The union representing Air Canada pilots is preparing for a possible strike next month. Business reporter Kyle Bax has that story.
The pilots are frustrated right now.
Pilots at Air Canada are beginning to wear lanyards and pins with the message "Strike Ready." The union and airline have been at the bargaining table for more than a year. The head of the union, Charlene Hoodie, says the big issues include scheduling and compensation.
We've seen a large gap between ourselves and our American counterparts. Right now, some of my American counterparts are making twice as much as I do and the pilots that I represent.
Pilots are now voting on whether to give their union a strike mandate. They've been without a contract since September. Negotiations have included a mediator.
We are far apart.
The airline says it hopes to finalize a deal over the next several weeks. Any job action would be the latest headache for travelers this year, following the sudden closure of Lynx Air, a strike by WestJet mechanics, and severe weather damaging the terminal and planes at Calgary's airport.
There's
seemingly some kind of a crisis going on somewhere. It's just the nature of the airline sector here in Canada.
Rick Erickson is an aviation analyst.
Clearly, pilots at Air Canada have watched other pilots at other airlines, particularly in the United States, gain very substantive benefits.
The earliest the union could strike is September 17th. Kyle Bax, CBC News, Calgary.
And that is the latest national and international news from World Report. News anytime at cbcnews.ca. I'm Marcia Young.
Good morning, Manitoba. You're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1. I'm Emily Brass, filling in this week for Marcy Marcusa. Here's what's coming up on this hour of the show. COVID-19 cases are surging in the United States as kids there go back to school. We'll speak with an epidemiologist to see how we can prepare for an increase in COVID cases. A United Nations rapporteur on contemporary forms of slavery has some strong words for Canada. We'll look at their findings with a member of the Migrant Rights Network. And designer bags, high-end denim, well, you can find it at thrift stores. We'll hear how you can hit the jackpot and find gold next time you go thrifting in Winnipeg. You're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1. Eleven minutes after 7 o'clock, time for news headlines with Josh Crabb.
Good morning. The sister of a 15-year-old attacked with a machete says her brother's skull is fractured and he's on bed rest after a 20-hour surgery. She says it happened when the teen was walking with some friends on Selkirk near Aikens after a soccer game Saturday night. A family who fled missiles in the skies over Ukraine has been attacked with baseball bats in the streets of Winnipeg. It happened on the afternoon of August 3rd. A mother and her 14-year-old son were badly beaten in an unprovoked daylight assault in the Elmwood, East Kildonan area. And library hours in Winnipeg are set to expand starting this fall, but one parent in Fort Garry says her local branch is losing out. I'll tell you why coming up in your next local CBC News at 7:30.
Thank you, Josh.
You're welcome.
That's CBC's Josh Crabb. Abby Ediemi is in the studio on the other side of the glass, and he's going to give us a look at the forecast for today. Hi, Abby.
I am. We're looking at cloudy skies. That's what the forecast is revealing to me at this point, with showers and thunderstorm also on the menu across the province today. It's going to be breezy with some light winds in most area. Currently in Winnipeg, we're still at 19 degrees and partly cloudy outside. It's trying to make a clear appearance, but nope, that's not going to happen because we'll be getting more of mainly cloudy skies with a slim chance of showers this morning and into the afternoon period during your lunch hour. You should be feeling that. There's also risk of thunderstorm to come with that. It will be breezy, and then we'll get to a high of 28. With the humidity factored in, it will feel close to 33. And then for tonight, that cloudy sky will still stay with us with that good chance of showers. So that shower is just going to hang out with us. It's more going to be like here and there, and then it's going to stay with us all night. And along with it would be that risk of thunderstorm into the evening, then becoming light late in the evening, and will cool off to 18. In other regions, we're also seeing cloudy skies and showers in the forecast expected. The air quality advisory is still in effect for the northern part of the province, as well as the heat warning for Churchill. Thompson at 12, Churchill at 15, smoky at this time. Down south, we're seeing cloudy conditions in Brandon at 15. Dauphin is under that severe thunderstorm watch at 17 degrees, but currently sunny at that part of the province. And then Gimli, Steinbeck, Morris, Hall stuck at 19 degrees and cloudy conditions. Right now, Winnipeg, we are at 19, a cloudy day ahead with scattered showers here and there and a risk of thunderstorms.
I love a good thunderstorm in the summer. How about you, Abby?
It just rolls by.
Yeah, let's hope for it. We could use the cooling off, and we could use it to cut down on the smoke. Thank you, Abby.
Thank you.
That's CBC's Abby Ediemi. And May McKillop joins me now in the studio with a look at traffic. Something going on Osborne Street today.
Yeah, we've gotten a couple tips about Osborne Village, just near that new apartment complex being built. So around Confusion Corner, things are getting pretty backed up, both northbound and southbound Osborne, which is going to happen. But if it's everyone remember, keep zipper merging with your fellow commuters, keep things smooth and positive. And if you're seeing anything else out there, give me a heads up, 204-788-3093.
Coming up on 7:15, and you're listening to CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM and 990 AM in Winnipeg. And a heads up that the 990 AM signal will be off the air later this morning. That's to do some tower maintenance and repair the lights. So the outage will begin after our morning show ends, around 8:45. It should be done by 6 p.m. And then on Friday, the 89.3 FM transmitter will be operated at reduced power, but will generally be off the air while that tower work happens, again from 8:45 to 6 p.m. During those times, you could listen to the other station. So while 89.3 is off, listen to 990 AM and vice versa. But of course, you can always catch us around the world on the CBC Listen app and as well on our website, cbc.ca/Manitoba. It's 7:15 now. I'm Emily Brass. A final United Nations report has some strong language about Canada's temporary foreign worker program. The special investigator calls the program a breeding ground for modern forms of slavery. This final report confirms initial impressions of the special rapporteur who spoke about it last year. His comments came on the heels of a fact-finding mission to different parts of the country. Joining us now for his reaction is Byron Cruz with the Migrant Rights Network. Hello.
Good morning.
So what stood out for you in this UN report looking at Canada's foreign workers program?
Yes, not surprising for me. At the same time, happy with the context of the report and also with the recommendations.
And so, yeah, like what is outstanding to you then when you see that?
Basically, the recommendations of in terms of permanent residence for all migrant workers, because we are aware that they have been suffering abuse during many years. Then this is the main recommendation, and it's the priority at this time.
And the special rapporteur cited factors that are causing vulnerability for these workers. What are some of those factors?
Mainly because workers are coming with a specific working permit, meaning that they can only work with one employer. It's a closed work permit. Then if workers are fired, they get being deported. Like a woman who gets pregnant, they are in a disadvantage. Most likely that they will be sent back to their country of origin. Someone who complains about not having access to healthcare and being sent back to their country of origin or not being invited to the next season.
So that might lead people to not speak up when they're having issues like that.
Definitely afraid of being deported. That's the main issue.
And so what can you tell us about the number of people coming into Canada under this program?
Well, the last information that we have is from 2023, 240,000 temporary workers came to Canada.
Okay, and so what kinds of workplaces are hiring through the program?
Mostly restaurant and food service, agriculture, and fishing.
Oh, okay. So as we noted in the introduction, the assessment shouldn't be a surprise. It reflects the initial comments from the special rapporteur that were made last year. What's the response from the federal government and the provinces after that report came out?
No reactions from the provinces, no more than throwing the ball to the federals. And the federals will saying that they will be strict with bad employers. And what we are saying, this is not a situation of good or bad employers. This is a situation of a system that allows abuse of migrant workers.
Mm-hmm. And then I guess the government is actually focusing on the numbers and caps. Are those part of the problem, do you think?
Yes, they are focusing on caps and numbers and sectors. They recently said that they will regularize workers in the construction sector. And what we are telling the government, they need to fix that proposal. And they need to regularize everyone work in the different industries.
Mm-hmm. And so what are some of the improvements that are recommended in the report?
Basically, a lot of emphasis on permanent residence. That's the main situation. And their criticism towards the proposal from the government to move towards sectorial permits, because sectorial permits will not be enough because workers will be stigmatized. They won't find work in any other industry or the same area.
And then if someone, does leave a job because of abuse, what happens to them then?
Basically, they are, if they get to us or they get to a support organization, they can ask for an open work permit, but the open work permit takes weeks to months to get it, and also it's only good for 1 year, and then after that year, they don't have the chance to stay here.
So what is your group calling for then, in light of this report?
We are calling the government to sit with us and discuss permanent residence.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for joining us this morning, Byron.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Byron Cruz is with the Migrant Rights Network. That's a cross-Canada advocacy alliance.
Food, art, music, dance, and more. Cultivation Festival FAMD is back August 19th to 25th. Proudly sponsored by CBC. Come celebrate Manitoba's rich Filipino culture with events taking place all over the city, like Ceremonia, an all-Philippine X art exhibit, Lupa Ay Bahay, a Filipino indigenous craft exhibit, and Sala, a Filipino film festival. Visit cbc.ca/Manitoba/community for details.
20 minutes after 7 o'clock, you're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1, broadcasting around the world on our CBC Manitoba YouTube channel. You can also check us out on the CBC Listen app. Well, the Vaniers wrote this song for their 10-year-old selves, sitting in front of the TV and hearing the pump-up anthems playing along with sporting events. This is Painted Town.
Chase a feeling enough to put you in the deep end. It's just something about that moment. Man, I wish that you could see it. Picture something like the streets turning red for the night, and everybody knows I'm pushing to the morning light. Yeah, you might not see it now with your head in the clouds, but we're gonna make it. I know we're gonna make it right. You know it's never been a secret. People can't just get their feet wet. Anticipation turns to motion. Now all you gotta do is feed it. It's like the walls are closing in. Tunnel visions of a fire burning under your skin. A premonition of a moment you never lived. But we're gonna make it. I know we're gonna make it right. It's just a morning light. Now you get to running when you hit the ground. Looking at all the colors of a painted town. It's in the fixing for the feeling to come back around. But we're gonna make it. I know we're gonna make it right. Like the streets turning red for the night, and everybody knows I'm pushing to the morning light. Yeah, you might not see it now with your head in the clouds, but we're gonna make it. I know we're gonna make it right.
was the Vaniers with their latest song, Painted Town, and their new EP of the same name is out now. A great anthem to bring us into the sports report. Paul McGowan is in for Scott Regehr today with the CBC Sports News. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Emily.
So let's start with a big signing in the CFL.
Yeah, well, I mean, the CFL doesn't typically boast Canadian starting quarterbacks. That's what made Nathan Rourke such a big deal when he first found success with the Lions a couple of years ago. He, of course, moved on, tried to make it in the NFL, spent time with Jacksonville and New England. Most recently was with the Falcons. They cut Rourke this week, and we have since learned that Nathan Rourke's NFL experiment is over. At least for now, he is back with the BC Lions. Here's their co-GM, Neil McAvoy.
When he was cut yesterday and waiting for him to figure out what his next step was, coming back to Canada maybe wasn't something people had their eyes on. But this is a guy that, when he was with us in the past, moved the needle in every market, which is something that we had not had as a league, going to Saskatchewan and Toronto and places like that, where he moves the needle, which is it's good for us and it's good for the league. It's good for Canada.
Also good for Nathan Rourke, who will become the highest paid player in the CFL next season. By the way, he's joining the team today, might start as soon as Sunday. So a whirlwind couple of days for Nathan Rourke.
Wow, get in there, Nathan.
Get in there.
So let's go to baseball now. It was a late start last night for the Blue Jays. How did they do against the Angels?
They did well. They had the bats going last night. They win 6-1 on the strength of 2 home runs, another 2 hits from Will Wagner. The most interesting moment of this game, though, came in the 7th inning. A ball in the dirt that George Springer claims hit his front left foot, and so the Blue Jays appeal, and sure enough, replays on the broadcast show the ball hitting Springer in the foot, and yet...
The call on the field stands. Toronto loses their challenge.
Wow, that was a little bit of a surprise. No way. If I'm George Springer, I'm getting ejected from this game.
Caleb Joseph on the verge of swearing, but about to look like the smartest man in baseball, because about 8 seconds later, George Springer does indeed get himself ejected from the game for arguing the call. Continues to melt down from there. Jays manager John Schneider talked after the game about trying to hold Springer back from home plate umpire Manny Gonzalez.
I kind of wish I was wearing spikes at that moment. I almost went down once. I mean, George isn't going to look into the dugout and say he got hit if he didn't get hit. It's pretty clear from our view that he did. You know, maybe there wasn't an angle in New York. You get it. And, I thought it would, there's no need to throw George out there. He was kind of walking away and gathering himself. That was kind of, I think, why he reacted the way he did.
For the record, George Springer very apologetic after the game. The Blue Jays have a chance to sweep that series with the Angels' first pitch tonight just after 8:30.
And finally, we're just 2 weeks out from the Paralympics. Canada has finalized its roster of athletes. What can you tell us about that?
Well, it's a sizable delegation headed to Paris, 87 Paralympians. By sport, wheelchair basketball is the best represented at 24 athletes across the men's and women's teams. Now, Carrie Yanis of the women's team is hoping people tune in, but in case the interest is not there, she has an idea about how to pull more viewers.
The Olympics are over. I think we all were super hyped watching them. I know I was watching sports that I wouldn't normally watch. And now we've got a little bit of a break, and then we head into the Paralympics. We would love all of your support for all the athletes that are training their butts off year round. Snoop Dogg, if you want to drop in, I'm sure some of the guys would throw you in a wheelchair rugby chair, show you what it's like.
Especially if Snoop Dogg is mic'd up for that wheelchair rugby experience, I think that could do numbers. By the way, Winnipeg's Bethany Johnson, part of that wheelchair basketball team for the women. The opening ceremony for the Paralympics in Paris goes August 28th.
More great sports to check out. Thank you so much, Paul.
Thanks, Emily.
That's Paul McGowan, who is joining us with the CBC Sports Report. We're coming up on local news time. Still to come in the show, the new school year starts in just a few weeks. Hard to believe, I know. But how can Manitobans prepare themselves for an expected spike in COVID cases? We'll have more information on that. We're also going to hear from Winnipeg students about what an all-out ban on cell phones would mean to them. Of course, 6 Canadian provinces have already gone there. Manitoba hasn't said so yet, but it is definitely on the table. What do you think about it? Could you go without your cell phone? Do you think you could do what the students are doing right now? Call our listener line if you want to weigh in on that. The number's 204-788-3205. You're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1. The news is next.
This is CBC News. At 7:30, it's mostly cloudy and 19 in downtown Winnipeg, mainly sunny, and 17 in Dauphin, smoky, and 15 in Churchill. Good morning, I'm Josh Crabb. The sister of a 15-year-old attacked with a machete says her brother's skull is fractured and he's on bed rest after a 20-hour surgery. The teen was walking with some friends on Selkirk Avenue near Aikens after a soccer game Saturday night. Police say the victim and another 15-year-old got into a dispute that quickly escalated. The sister says her brother was chased, robbed, kicked, and attacked with a machete.
We just about lost him. He was brought in critical condition. He spent 20 hours in surgery. He had nerves reattached in not only his hands, but his legs and his back and his face and his head. It's a miracle he's alive.
The accused, another 15-year-old boy, is charged with aggravated assault. Police say the teens did not know each other. The sister thinks the charges should be upgraded to attempted murder because of the severity of the attack. Another Ukrainian family has fled war only to be greeted with violence on the streets of Winnipeg. A mother and her 14-year-old son were beaten with a baseball bat in an unprovoked daylight attack in the Elmwood East Kildonan area. It happened on the afternoon of August 3rd. Two men in their 20s face numerous charges, including assault and robbery. The boy remains in hospital with severe injuries. Joanne Lewandowski is president of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress in Manitoba. She doesn't think newcomers are being targeted.
I think it's just happening to people who are at the wrong place at the wrong time. I don't think the aim is for Ukrainian people. I think the aim is whoever you can get. We're just going to beat you up, take what you have, and run. And I guess that's what happened.
The attack happened only a few blocks away from a fatal stabbing last December. The victim in that case was a Ukrainian immigrant who was on his way to work. The Russian governor of Belgorod has declared a state of emergency. The region is along the border with Ukraine near Kursk, where Ukrainian troops have been advancing. Vyacheslav Gladkov says Ukraine is shelling his region as well.
The situation in our Belgorod region continues to remain extremely difficult and tense. Daily shelling from the armed forces of Ukraine destroyed houses, wounded and dead civilians. Therefore, we are making a decision from today throughout the Belgorod region to protect the population and provide additional measures of support to victims by declaring an emergency at the regional level.
Russia says it destroyed more than 100 Ukrainian drones overnight, about 40 of which were targeting Kursk. It's been just over a week since Ukraine launched its surprise incursion into Kursk. Kiev says it now controls more than 70 towns and villages there. Talks are due to begin in Geneva today, aimed at ending the 16-month-long civil war in Sudan. The violence between rival military factions has claimed thousands of lives and forced 10 million others from their homes. Mukesh Kapilia is a former UN chief coordinator for Sudan.
The mood here in Geneva is pretty glum. However, I think the critical issue for Sudan is not peace, but what to do about humanitarian access while the fighting goes on, and the millions are at risk of starvation. Many of them are in famine already, and of course, other millions are displaced both internally and as refugees.
The talks are sponsored by the U.S. and Saudi Arabia. A Winnipeg parent says she's frustrated her local library is set to cut its hours back, even as the city prepares to increase library hours overall across the system. Carla Epp says she usually takes her kids to the Fort Garry Library in the mornings, but after Labor Day, Epp will lose 3 mornings per week as opening hours are pushed back from 10 a.m. to noon.
I think it is really unfortunate that they are offering hours to some people at the expense of other people. Libraries need to be funded properly so that nobody is losing out.
The city announced it was expanding hours as part of the 2024 budget. It followed a report that found Winnipeggers were frustrated by confusing and inconsistent hours across branches. The changes take effect September 3rd. And if you're listening to us this morning on 990 AM, a heads up, there will be a service interruption later this morning due to tower maintenance west of Winnipeg. The outage will begin at 8:45 this morning, and the repairs are expected to be completed by 6 tonight. On Friday, meantime, people listening on 89.3 FM will experience a service interruption between 8:45 and 6 because of tower maintenance downtown. During outages, you can always tune in on an alternate signal or the Listen app at cbc.ca/listen, or YouTube. That is the CBC News from Winnipeg. Your next local news is at 8:30.
Thanks, Josh. A great chance to check out the Listen app if you haven't already. Some of our past interviews are on there. A lot of other shows. You can also check out CBC Music. So good thing we maybe in a way that we're having this outage because people will go and check it out, I hope.
That's right. More than one way to listen, assuming you have that internet service to access the Listen app. You know, if you're in your car, I guess it might be tough depending on where you are.
Well, maybe plug in your phone, use that. I don't know. There's always a way around it, Josh.
There is usually, yes, for sure.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
That's CBC's Josh Crabb joining us from the Manitoba newsroom, and joining me from the other side of the glass is Abby Adeyemi with a look at the forecast.
Good morning, Manitoba. Let's look at conditions across the province today. We're expecting mainly cloudy skies. We will see a bit of mix of sun and clouds here and there. Showers and thunderstorms in the forecast are likely in a lot of the regions with breezy conditions, and some humidity will be factored in also. We will see temperatures ranging from 12 degrees to 31, and then we're going to be cooling off to lows around 16 and 18 for tonight. Right now, Winnipeg, it is clear at 19 degrees. Mainly cloudy skies will stay with us today. A slight chance of showers and thunderstorm in the forecast. A breezy day ahead with a high of 28. Brandon is sitting at 15 and mostly cloudy at the moment. We are looking for mostly cloudy conditions in that region and a good chance of showers and thunderstorm. High of 23. Thompson, good morning. You are seeing mainly sunny conditions at this time. It is 12 degrees, respecting the mix of sun and clouds and increasing cloudiness later. A chance of showers and thunderstorm. We also have local smoke affecting that region, and that will stay with you for the most of the day. High will be near 26. For tonight, some showers and thunderstorms will continue throughout that region. And if we go further north in Churchill, where it's 15 degrees, we're seeing smoky conditions at this moment. We have a heat warning in effect, and that is due to that widespread smoke and wildfires in the region. We'll get a high of 31. And then some, cooler temperatures expected by Thursday due to the rain that you'll be getting tonight. Devon is seeing mainly sunny conditions at 17 at this time. A severe thunderstorm watch is also in effect for that region. Expect mainly cloudy conditions before that. High chance of showers you will be getting, and you'd get to a high of 24. Gimli is cloudy at 19, heading to a high of 27. Steinbach is seeing cloudy conditions at 19 degrees, heading to a high of 28. And Morris, partly cloudy skies at 19 for the Pembina Valley region today. The forecast calls for mainly cloudy conditions, a slim chance of showers, and a greater chance of thunderstorms later in the day, and you'd warm up to 27. So the conditions across board: cloudy, a good chance of showers, and definitely thunderstorm will not miss us. So we'll be looking out for that.
I'm going to be out on my balcony to check out that thunderstorm.
Let it roll.
Thank you so much, Abby.
Thank you.
That's CBC's Abby Adeyemi. He's also our studio technician. And our show director, May McKillop, joins me now in studio with an update on the traffic. What's the latest out there, May?
We've gotten a couple different tips about the Osborne Village area around the new apartment complex that's being built. So there's construction barricades up on Osborne Street, and it's affecting both northbound and southbound, all up around that area. It can get pretty congested there. I'm also seeing Pembina south of Osborne is getting a little backed up now from all of that traffic. Anything else you guys want to let me know about, please give me a call. The number is 204-788-3093.
It's always a bad area down there at Confusion Corner with traffic.
Yeah, avoid it if you can.
And on top of it, there's construction around there, and now this.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, best to go around. Thank you, May.
You're welcome.
That's CBC's May McKillop. 39 minutes after 7 o'clock, you're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM and 990 AM in Winnipeg. I'm Emily Brass. Well, what's the best thing you've ever found while thrifting? A Winnipeg woman thought it was her lucky day when she found what she believed was a designer bag valued at over $40,000. She shared her find on TikTok in a video that now has more than 20,000 likes, and only later found out that her great designer find was actually just a great dupe. But her post sparked a conversation about secondhand shops and all the amazing items that can be found right here in Winnipeg. Teddy Gilmartin is also an avid thrifter. As a matter of fact, she's dedicated to visiting every thrift store in our province. She joins us now to share some of her best thrift tricks and hacks. Hi, Teddy. Every thrift store in the province?
Yes,
Really?
I am determined.
Wow. So you make day trips out to other towns and
Yeah, so I actually work full time. I started this originally when I was self-employed, so I did kind of hammer out a lot at the beginning. So I'm moving through a little slower than I did at the beginning, but there's around 100 thrift stores in our province, which is actually quite a few. We are like very lucky that we have so many, and I'm at about like 65 done.
Wow, good job. So have you ever found anything designer or maybe thought you found something designer?
So only once I've found a pair of Valentino shoes. They were vintage and in kind of rough shape, so I did leave them behind. And that's kind of part of my mantra as well, is, if it doesn't work for me, leave it for somebody else. We want treasures for everybody, right? Kind of hoarding them to myself isn't my point. I want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to find that good stuff,
Yeah, and you don't want it to pick up dust in your closet either, right?
Someone else is going to love it.
Yeah, that's great. So what is the best thing you found while thrifting?
I found quite a few amazing things, to be honest. I'm not going to brag, but one of my favorites, I'll share two of my favorites. The first one is a bright pink sweatsuit that I found in Palm Desert at this amazing thrift store. It is just terry cloth. It has Palm Desert logo. It gives absolute desert vibes. I wear it almost every day. So that's one of the pieces that I utilize and use all the time. And then there's one piece that I've never worn. I found it in a thrift store in Vancouver, actually. And it is a vintage Toronto designer that it's, shoulder pads. It's from the 80s. It's cheetah. It's got a peplum. It's in fantastic shape. I'm not sure if, the previous owner even wore it very much. And it just sits in my closet waiting for the opportunity for one day to wear.
Oh, I kind of remember those dresses. That's awesome. So how did you get into thrifting?
So I've loved thrifting for, my whole life. I've been a little bit dramatic and a little bit flamboyant since I was a kid and enjoyed dressing up. I remember in high school, I would wear heels and clothes from my dress-up box growing up, which I loved to dress up. So people almost even used to make fun of me for wearing such odd things. But ever since, I've just enjoyed it. I also enjoy the idea of giving older items new life. So making sure that we don't create intense waste. The fashion industry is a huge contributor, probably the biggest contributor to environmental waste, not only, in our own landfills, but being shipped overseas to developing countries. So ensuring that we can give new life to old products and, have a little bit of a different style, look a little bit unique. That's my favorite part.
Great reasons. So what separates a good thrifter from a great thrifter?
Dedication to the thrift, getting up on that, Saturday morning and being committed to going and spending time. So I find that when you walk into a thrift store and you want to find that particular thing, I'm looking for this, you often don't find it and then you overlook a bunch of beautiful pieces. So going in with an open mind, looking for anything and everything that might catch your eye and also leaving other things behind, like I said before, making sure that, you aren't keeping all these amazing pieces to yourself to resell or make a ton of money on. Leave the thrift for other people to enjoy as well.
So you probably need like a certain vibe or attitude when you walk in the store, right?
Yeah, chill. Relax.
Yeah. Like you said, we're often focused on getting that one thing, but be open.
Get a coffee,
exactly.
Take your time. Yeah.
Exactly. It's recreational.
Yes.
So you've been to almost every thrift store in the province, or a lot of them, like you said, dozens and dozens of them. So far, which town has had the best stuff?
That's a good question. I find that a lot of the time when you move outside of the city limits, you find a lot of great stuff. So a lot of those, like even house items like mid-century modern, I found a lot of like classic mid-century modern items for low prices outside of the city. So one of my favorite stops so far has been Austin, Manitoba. They just had the best prices. I really value saving a buck when it comes to clothing, not in fast fashion. We want to make sure we're not buying new stuff at super cheap that will will just, fall apart and we discard, but we can find these amazing older pieces for super cheap. So Austin, Manitoba had like $2 for things. I found this amazing leather jacket, I think for $4. That is so warm and an amazing fall piece. I could even wear it into winter. It has polar fleece and this massive hood. And again, it's a style that you don't see super frequently. So kind of stand out from the crowd while saving a buck.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I can even tell by your look, you've got this crochet vest on.
Hey,
was that a thrift store find as well?
Yes, Emily.
Of
Everything I'm
course.
wearing is from the thrift, of course.
That's
It's
great.
radio you can't see, but I swear.
Well, we will have this interview on our YouTube channel if you want to check out Teddy's look later. So, what makes a thrift store good?
I think prices are obviously kind of number one for me. I want to make sure that, we aren't giving a for-profit entity a ton of money. So I think backed by a really good organization that helps maybe, the Children's Hospital here in the province, or the Winnipeg Humane Society actually has a small thrift store inside of their gift shop. Good causes with good prices. So you can buy a lot and, get some merchandise off their hands while also supporting a good cause. I'm kind of a Value Village hater after being to so many. I don't need to get on, my soapbox and complain about that, but finding a good organization that is maybe run by volunteers and that supports, the local community makes a good thrift store to me.
And, sometimes you go in and you see something that's got a $3 price tag and you saw it in Dollarama for $1. Like
I know, I've seen
week.
those TikToks too, where people compare new items to what Value Village has, and it is a little spooky. Yeah.
So how do you make sure you're not getting ripped off when you're in there?
Well, I think getting ripped off is all relative. So I find that unless you are buying from this kind of massive for-profit entity, you can almost never get ripped off. I think that's sometimes you might feel like you overpay for something. Well, maybe that money is going towards, let's say, the Children's Hospital. That can't go wrong. So I say choosing the thrift stores that you support and donate to correctly means you almost never get ripped off because you want to support these good organizations that look after the community. And I think that's the point of the thrift, is to reduce, reuse, recycle, and then give back.
We're learning so much from you, Teddy.
Thanks.
Maybe you can tell us what your strategy is, if you can divulge your secrets. When you walk in the store, what's your strategy?
Having a good attitude, being a happy girl. I think in general, it is just having an open mind. So I go in thinking whatever pops up to me, let's look at it. Let's go for it. Even if maybe I have a bunch of that thing already, maybe let's check it out. Maybe I can give away another one that doesn't, look as good on me. And maybe this one's a little bit better. Committing to some time in my day. So I usually leave my Saturdays to this. So my strategy is good attitude, lots of time, and just have fun.
Oh, sounds like a great Saturday. Thank you so much, Teddy.
Thanks.
Teddy Gilmartin is an avid thrifter from Winnipeg.
No use selling those lonely chairs, to the void they go and back again. Now how do I keep framing these stories then, feeling wild and raw by some future hand? Well, we swung from the cables of evening's row, when the nighthawks come tumbling through the pink and gold. Tell me, how do we get back to feeling the glow of the early years? Now I had the fortune of growing up wild, neath the willow tree, Midwestern sky. Kept on running those little boy thighs through the fields out back with the cabbage wax, where we swung from the cables of evening's row, where the nighthawks come tumbling through the pink and gold. Tell me, how do we get back to feeling the glow of the early years? What's encased in this treasure box? Some foreign coins and a mirror And I can't quite trace these memories lost in a rattle town. I just rattle off. Could we swing from the cables of evening's road, with the night hawks come tumbling through the pink and gold? Tell me, how do we get back to feeling the glow of the earth?
Nice vibes. That was Bowerbirds with Thrift Store, building on that last interview we just had. You're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1 from Winnipeg. I'm Emily Brass. Well, COVID-19 cases are surging in the U.S. as schools reopen for a new year. In Winnipeg's South End, high virus activity levels have been detected in wastewater. Meanwhile, levels in the north end of the city are low, and moderate levels have been found in the west end. Kids here will be back to school in less than 3 weeks. So what can we do to keep those numbers at bay? Dr. Christopher Labos is an epidemiologist and a cardiologist, and he joins us all the way from Greece. Hi, Dr. Labos.
Hello there.
What's it like in Greece today?
Very hot. Very, very, very hot.
Okay, well, I hope you have a good way to cool off. In the meantime, give us a breakdown on what those COVID levels mean in terms of cases.
Right. So as you correctly pointed out, the situation is not uniform across Manitoba or even across Winnipeg. Based on the different wastewater sampling venues that exist, you are seeing different levels of activity. And of course, there's a lot of heterogeneity across the country as well. But if we were going to summarize everything, I think what we can say is that we are seeing a spike in COVID-19 cases, which is consistent with what we saw last year. COVID-19, in defiance of conventional wisdom and atypically compared to other respiratory viruses like influenza, does seem to have a summer bump. And that is what we are seeing now, probably driven by travel and people going on vacation and flying on planes and all that. But we are seeing a bit of an uptick in cases, not as high as what we saw in the winter, but an uptick nevertheless.
How concerning are these levels we're seeing in Winnipeg? You know, high and moderate levels. Should we be worried about that?
Well, it depends what you mean by worried. I mean, the cases are going up. People are getting sick. If you've been vaccinated recently and you've had COVID before and survived, you likely will survive. But I think we have to acknowledge that there are long-term complications to COVID. I just heard a story of, an admittedly elderly patient who got COVID, was hospitalized, was discharged home, but has been left with some long-term neurological complications. The individual cannot speak or walk the way they used to. So there are complications associated with COVID, and we can't be complacent about them. So you have to be able to sort of hold two contradictory thoughts in your mind. Yes, the situation is different now compared to what it was in 2020, but it is not a benign virus. And so an uptick in cases should not be met with indifference. It should be met with a plan going forward to try to minimize the impact that it's going to have, especially with the school year starting very soon.
And of course, COVID changes with time as well. What do we know about the new variants?
So all the new variants that we're seeing now are Omicron subvariants. So they are all related in some way, which is why we're not seeing the massive disruption like kicking over the apple cart that we saw with the introduction of Omicron, which was so different from the Delta, the Delta variant. So because these are all part of the Omicron subfamily with some differences, they all tend to behave in similar-ish ways, which is why people are benefiting to some degree from previous immunity. Are there differences in symptoms from variant to variant? Yes, but it's hard to pin down how much of this is variant-specific versus individual variability between people. And so this is a challenging virus because it does keep changing, and it's hard to know which of these changes is significant and which of them is not.
So what are some of those symptoms of the new variants that people should be keeping an eye out for?
So regardless of which variant you get infected with, this is still a respiratory virus. What you are most likely to get is fever, shortness of breath, cough, the classic respiratory virus symptoms. There are going to be some people saying that they get more GI side effects with some variants as opposed to others. It's hard to know if these differences are consistent, if they are population-wide, or if they just represent the natural variation that you see when a bunch of people get infected. So at the end of the day, while we could, hypothesize a lot about whether the variants are really different or if they're all more or less the same, at the end of the day, this is a respiratory virus. If you have a quote unquote summer cold right now, it's not a summer cold. There's a very good chance that it is COVID. And so if you can get tested. And if you are eligible for treatment, then you should, of course, also go and get treated.
So where are we at with updated vaccines and boosters when it comes to the new variants?
So if there is going to be an updated vaccine rolling out in the fall to better match the circulating strains. The current dominant strain in Canada, at least, is the JN1 subvariants. That could change. We are seeing an uptick of the KP3 variants. I realize these names and numbers don't mean anything to most people. These are all Omicron subvariants. So the point is, though, is that there is going to be an updated vaccine. Every effort is going to be made to try to match it as well as we can to what's circulating. The real danger, or perhaps danger is the wrong word, but the suboptimal aspect of this is that because COVID keeps changing, it's possible that it won't be an exact match by the time it rolls out in the fall, but it will be an improvement compared to the vaccine that was rolled out last year. So come the fall, when we roll out the flu vaccine, it's highly likely that at the same time, just for the purposes of convenience, there's going to be an updated COVID vaccine, which will try to be matched as well as possible to the circulating strains.
So just in the last minute or so, Dr. Labos, people will be back at work and school in full force coming up in September, just a few weeks away. Meanwhile, we're seeing COVID rates surging in the States. What do you expect to happen here in Manitoba?
Great question. We'll see. Come the fall, as we spend more and more time indoors, we will see more COVID. We will see more influenza. We will see more RSV. This is the unfortunate reality. The best thing that you can do, the thing that we have the most power under, is, apart from vaccination, is clean the air in your office or school or workplace. If you can get an indoor air filter to clean the air or have that as part of your building management, that's going to be the biggest thing. We insist on having clean drinking water as part of our social contract. We should insist on having clean air as well. And so if we can do that, that at least is going to minimize the impact of all the respiratory viruses that we're going to see in the winter, whether they be COVID, influenza, or RSV.
Thanks so much for joining us this morning, Doctor.
My pleasure. Take care.
That's Dr. Christopher Labos, an epidemiologist and cardiologist, and he joined us all the way from Greece. And joining me right now in the studio is Josh Crabb with a look at the CBC News headlines.
Good morning. A 15-year-old attacked with a machete last weekend suffered life-changing injuries. The teen was walking with friends on Selkirk near Aikens after a soccer game when he was assaulted, while his sister is frustrated with the charge against the accused. Another Ukrainian family has fled war only to be met with violence on the streets of Winnipeg. A mother and her 14-year-old son were beaten with a baseball bat earlier this month. The unprovoked daylight attack happened in the Elmwood East Kildonan area, while the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress is concerned. And as the city prepares to increase library hours overall across the system, I'll tell you why one Winnipeg parent is frustrated about the hours at her local library. Your next local CBC News is at 8:30.
Thank you, Josh.
You're welcome.
That's CBC's Josh Crabb. Well, still to come on Information Radio, how do students feel about a potential cell phone ban in Manitoba schools? CBC's Jim Agapito talked to some students about how they feel. The traffic, we've been hearing about a situation on Osborne Street around Confusion Corner. Give us a call on the commuter line and let us know what's happening right now. 204-788-3093 is the number to call. Mainly cloudy today in Winnipeg. Slight chance of showers with risk of a thunderstorm, and it's going to be pretty windy with some gusts up to 50 kilometers an hour. High 28, 33 is how it's going to feel with the humidex. Tonight, cloudy, chance of showers, risk of a thunderstorm early in the evening. Breezy, but that wind becoming light late in the evening with a low of 18. Tomorrow, mainly cloudy, 60% chance of showers with a high of 26. A lot more still to come on Information Radio. World Report is coming up next.
On cue.
Discovering that I loved writing fiction so much was just a relief.
I'm Talia Schlanger, sitting in for Tom Power. If you've ever struggled with time management, you're going to want to hear from Carly Fortune about her incredibly methodical approach to writing a book, hour by hour, day by day, all the way to the New York Times bestseller list.
Q, this morning at 10:30 in Newfoundland, and on the CBC Listen app, or wherever you get your podcasts. The CBC News is next. Coming up in half an hour, it's The Current.
A U.S. federal judge says Google broke the law with its monopoly over online searches, changing the way people see and access information. Coming up on The Current, what's next after the landmark decision and why Canada should be taking notes.
This is World Report. Good morning, I'm Marcia Young. There is growing evidence Canada is caught in a dangerous climate cycle. Last year's extreme wildfire season drove an increase in global carbon emissions. And international research is warning those increased emissions mean bigger wildfires will be more likely in the future. The CBC's Ben Shingler has the details.
You could say that Canada was record-breaking, or, I'd go as far as saying it's record-shattering in a way. It's completely unprecedented.
Matthew Jones is a climate change researcher at the University of East Anglia in England. His team has been studying last year's wildfires for a new global report in the journal Earth System Science Data, and he says Canada stood out for all the wrong reasons.
So almost a decade's worth of fire emissions just in one fire season.
The country set records when it comes to the size of fires, how quickly they spread, and the total area burned, 6 times more than the average since 2001. This summer's wildfire season isn't on pace to be as bad, even with wildfires outside Jasper, Alberta, still burning.
It'll be an ongoing battle for Parks Canada and Alberta Wildfire to deal with for the next few months for sure, into the winter.
And the report found that if we don't cut emissions, extreme wildfire seasons in Canada will be more common, 6 to 11 times more likely by the year 2100.
And so reality is just catching up with what we have been predicting.
The findings aren't a surprise to Zev Gedaloff. He's a forestry researcher at the University of Guelph in Ontario.
The fact that wildfire is increasing and that increase is associated with climate change is something that fire scientists and climate scientists have been saying is going to happen for decades now.
In the decades to come, Gedaloff says it's crucial our forests are better managed and our homes proofed so that these ever-increasing fires have less to fuel them. Ben Shingler, CBC News, Montreal.
Ukraine's incursion into Russia is advancing quickly. U.S. President Joe Biden says he knows it's causing problems for Russian President Vladimir Putin.
It's creating a real dilemma for Putin, and we've been in direct contact, constant contact with the Ukrainians.
Overnight, Ukraine launched another huge drone offensive. Russia's military says it shot down more than 100 drones, some deep in its territory. The Russian region of Belgorod across the border from Kharkiv is now in a state of emergency. Here's the governor speaking through a translator.
The situation in our Belgorod region continues to remain extremely difficult and tense. Daily shelling from the armed forces of Ukraine destroyed houses, wounded and dead civilians.
Ukraine's military says it controls more than 70 towns and villages in Russia's Kursk region, and it has captured more than 100 Russian prisoners of war. This morning, Ukraine is fending off more attacks on its energy infrastructure. Here in Canada, an organization is raising money to help rebuild Ukraine's largest children's hospital. It was destroyed last month during a series of strikes by Russia. Idil Musa has more.
Imagine we as Canadians, as Torontonians, lose the ability to have sick kids.
Valery Kostuk is the executive director of the Canada-Ukraine Foundation. His organization is trying to help Ukraine's biggest children's hospital rebuild after a deadly missile strike in early July. Oksana Fomenyuk's 16-year-old daughter, Solomia, was undergoing life-saving dialysis treatment when the Akhmedet hospital in Kiev was struck. Video footage shows the teen carried out on a stretcher, covered in blood. Nowhere is safe in Ukraine, says Fomenyuk, not in the shelters, not in a children's hospital. Russia denies being behind the attack, but the United Nations says there's a high likelihood it was one of their missiles. The hospital is now trying to repair the damage.
The urgency is real.
Kostuk's organization helped send 17 dialysis machines to Ukraine in 2022. It's now trying to raise $1 million to help the Children's Hospital get a hold of much-needed equipment. Meanwhile, the hospital says it's continuing to provide care despite the challenges of a brutal war. Idil Musa, CBC News, Toronto.
The United States has approved a $20 billion military deal with Israel. The Pentagon says it will allow for the sale of F-15 fighter jets, tank cartridges, mortar cartridges, and Army vehicles. The jets will not be delivered until 2029, but other equipment could begin arriving in Israel by 2026. Since the war with Hamas began last October, the U.S. reportedly sent thousands of Hellfire missiles and 2,000-pound bombs to Israel. The Prime Minister of Japan says he will not be seeking re-election. Fumio Kishida says it's time for change within his Liberal Democratic Party, and it begins with him stepping aside. The party has recently been criticized because of several scandals, including the mishandling of donations. Laura Marchand has the latest from Tokyo.
It was a matter of when, not if. But many in Japan were still shocked to hear their prime minister was throwing in the towel. Kishida's 3 short years in power saw many sour on him and his party. The final nail in the coffin, a fundraising scandal with Liberal Democratic Party members pocketing kickbacks as the average Japanese citizen is struggling to make ends meet amid record high inflation. Only 25% of Japanese citizens approved of his administration, according to the public broadcaster. But people here say they were still surprised to see him go. This woman says she was shocked to hear the news, but said he couldn't survive the scandals plaguing the party. This office worker says it feels like Kishida didn't have a choice. The LDP lost some key by-elections earlier this year, and Kishida himself was set to face a leadership contest in September, one many say he couldn't win. Kishida said it's time for a new generation to lead the party, but the question is whether a new face will be enough to save the LDP in a country that seems eager for change. Laura Marchand, CBC News, Tokyo.
The U.S. government is making changes to try to stop migrants from illegally crossing over from Canada. It's trying to speed up the asylum claim process. Under the Safe Third Country Agreement, asylum seekers have to apply for refugee status in the first country they enter. Now, if they want an exemption, they will have to have their documents ready for U.S. border officials. Their screening can no longer be postponed, and migrants will only get 4 hours to consult a lawyer before it happens. After several months of disruptions for air travelers, there could be more turbulence ahead. The union representing Air Canada pilots is preparing for a possible strike next month. Business reporter Kyle Bax has the story.
The pilots are frustrated right now.
Pilots at Air Canada are beginning to wear lanyards and pins with the message "Strike Ready." The union and airline have been at the bargaining table for more than a year. The head of the union, Charlene Hoodie, says the big issues include scheduling and compensation.
We've seen a large gap between ourselves and our American counterparts. Right now, some of my American counterparts are making twice as much as I do and the pilots that I represent.
Pilots are now voting on whether to give their union a strike mandate. They've been without a contract since September. Negotiations have included a mediator.
We are far apart.
The airline says it hopes to finalize a deal over the next several weeks. Any job action would be the latest headache for travelers this year, following the sudden closure of Lynx Air, a strike by WestJet mechanics, and severe weather damaging the terminal and planes at Calgary's airport.
There's seemingly some kind of a crisis going on somewhere. It's just the nature of the airline sector here in Canada.
Rick Erickson is an aviation analyst.
Clearly, pilots at Air Canada have watched other pilots at other airlines, particularly in the United States, gain very substantive benefits.
The earliest the union could strike is September 17th. Kyle Bax, CBC News, Calgary.
I love you for
Katy Perry's music video for this song is getting her into some trouble in Spain. The video shows her partying in Ibiza and enjoying the beaches of Formentera. But some of the scenes appear to have been filmed in the middle of ecologically protected dunes, and a statement from the Spanish government says she didn't get permission to record there. The country's resource management group is investigating and says she's not being accused of crimes against the environment yet.
The sun is always rising, like the stars are in the sky.
And that is the latest national and international news from World Report. News anytime, cbcnews.ca. I'm Marcia Young.
Good morning, Manitoba. You're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM and 990 AM in Winnipeg. I'm Emily Brass, filling in this week for Marcy Marcusa. Here's what's coming up in this last half hour of the show. We're going to hear from Winnipeg students about what an all-out ban on cell phones would mean to them. Some Manitoba school boards are already moving in that direction, but in the digital age, when just about everyone seems to be glued to their cell phones, how do students feel about a potential ban on digital devices in Manitoba schools? CBC's Jim Agapito found out. We're also going to have a full look at your weather forecast, an update on that traffic situation on Osborne Street. So keep it locked here, 89.3 FM. I'm Emily Brass, filling in for Marcy Marcusa. Josh Crabb is in studio right now with a look at the CBC Manitoba news headlines.
Good morning. The sister of a 15-year-old attacked with a machete says her brother's skull is fractured and he's on bed rest after 20 hours of surgery. She says it happened when the teen was walking with some friends on Selkirk near Aikens after a soccer game Saturday night. The Ukrainian-Canadian Congress, meantime, is concerned about safety. This after a family who fled missiles in the skies over Ukraine was attacked with baseball bats in Winnipeg. It happened on the afternoon of August 3rd. A mother and her 14-year-old son were badly beaten in an unprovoked daylight assault in the Elmwood, East Kildonan area. And library hours in Winnipeg are set to expand starting this fall, but one parent in Fort Garry says her local branch is losing out. I'll tell you why coming up in your next local CBC News at 8:30.
Thank you so much, Josh.
You're welcome.
That's CBC's Josh Crabb joining us with a look at the news. Well, joining us now with a look at the forecast is Abby Adiemi. What's in store today?
A mix of sun and cloud. That's what's in store for us today. You can expect that to be the presence felt across board. We also have a chance of showers and possible thunderstorm in the forecast as well. It will be warm and breezy, so keep an eye out for that if you're out and about. Right now in Winnipeg, we are at 20. We're trying to see the sun make its way through those cloudy conditions we're seeing outside. In the city, we should be seeing mainly cloudy skies, a slight chance of showers this morning, late into the afternoon period, with a risk of thunderstorm in the forecast. It will be breezy. We'll get to a high of 28. And then for tonight, that cloudy sky is still going to stay with us with a good chance of showers this time and possible thunderstorm early evening into late in the evening period, and then the winds will become light later tonight and would cool off to 18. Similar condition tomorrow, mainly cloudy conditions, good chance of showers to start the day, and that's the condition throughout your Thursday. We'll be seeing highs near 26. In other regions, we're seeing these cloudy conditions there. A thunderstorm expected across board. Up north, we have an air quality advisory due to the wildfire, smoke, and heat warning in effect for Churchill. They're both Thompson and Churchill both hovering near 17 degrees at this time, seeing some smoky conditions also up there, while down south we're seeing cloudy conditions. Dauphin is seeing the severe thunderstorm watch at 19 degrees, and the rest of the region hovering between 18 and 20 degrees. 20 right now in Winnipeg, ahead with scattered showers here and there and a risk of thunderstorm.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Abby.
Thank you.
That's CBC's Abby Adiemi. And joining me now in the studio with a look at the traffic is May McKillop. What's going on Osborne now?
All morning, we've been hearing about slow traffic around Confusion Corner. I think it's a pretty common thing in that area. Osborne Street, north of Confusion Corner, it's backed up in both directions, both northbound and southbound we've been hearing. As well, northbound Pembina heading into Confusion Corner is looking pretty backed up. So if anyone wants to give us any updates on that area, we've had a few different tips, but I'd love to hear how it is right now or in the next half hour. We have time for one more traffic hit. Give us a call, 204-788-3093.
Coming up on 8:15, and you're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM and 990 AM. But just a heads up that the 990 AM signal from the Springsteen Tower is going to be off the air a little later today, and that's because of tower maintenance and to repair the lights. In fact, the outage will begin right after Information Radio ends around 8:45. It should wrap up by 6 p.m., but then on Friday, the 89.3 FM transmitter will be operating on reduced power, generally off the air while the work is done there, again from 8:45 a.m. until about 6 p.m. During these outages, you can tune into the other stations. So if you usually listen to us at 89.3 FM, you can tune into 990 AM and vice versa. And of course, it's also a wonderful opportunity to check out the CBC Listen app. And you can also hear us on our website, cbc.ca/Manitoba. Well, the school year is less than 3 weeks away, if you can believe it. And when school begins, K-8 students in the Hanover School Division will be spending a lot less time on their mobile devices. That's because the school division has banned cell phones at its schools. Hanover's Assistant Superintendent Colin Campbell spoke to CBC's Ian Fraze about the positive results of a no-device pilot project at Stony Brook Middle School.
It worked really well. So what we ended up noticing with that pilot project is significant decrease in behavior that was having to be dealt with by principal and vice principal in the school. A significant decrease in the amount of interactions that students had requested with the guidance counselor on online relationship challenges, as well as teachers reporting that they didn't have to obviously ask students to put cell phones away. And so time crunch of having to do that wasn't necessary anymore. And so it created positive time. The principal and vice principal talked about just a level of calm that was starting to present itself at school. You know, when we hear that, it's important that that's the positive impact that we're having. We need to consider expanding this. And that's what we did.
That was Assistant Superintendent Colin Campbell of the Hanover School Division. Come September, 6 Canadian provinces will have mobile phone bans in place at schools. So how do Manitoba students feel about the possibility of a cell phone ban here? CBC's Jim Agapito spoke with some Winnipeg students, including Jack Ralph, who's going into grade 10 at Kelvin High School.
I think it might actually improve a lot of stuff. A lot of people say that cell phones can be used as a productive tool, but the problem is that a lot of people aren't using it as a productive tool. So I think there are ways to use cell phones in productive ways, but a lot of schools have Chromebooks now that you can just use to do most of the schoolwork. So
Annabelle Dacey, I'll be in grade 12 when the school starts, and I go to Sturgeon Heights Collegiate. Our school currently has a sort of ban. We're allowed to use them during certain times of the day. In general, I don't think it's a horrible thing. There are certain things where it can definitely hinder and improve students' performance in schools. I don't think it's inherently a bad thing. One thing that I always find really helpful is when we use any of our digital files, it's much easier than having to deal with all the laptop carts in school if you're able to have it on your phone and simply pull it out and send it to your teacher. That even includes like answering emails and everything, or you're working on a presentation and you don't have any laptops, you need to finish at that class or that period.
Edwin Dalkey. I am currently 14 and I go to St. Paul's. I'm going into grade 10. I feel like in some ways it can be a pretty positive thing. So my school, we use Microsoft Teams on our phones as a main source of communication between staff and students, and just between students. Like say you need to contact a teacher, Microsoft Teams is the way to do that. If you want to communicate with a club you're in, Microsoft Teams is the way to do that. So I think that in banning phones, that would remove a lot of the communication throughout our school.
Liam Robson. I'm in grade 11 and I go to Kelvin. I definitely notice myself getting distracted on my phone a lot, in class. Sometimes I'll get a notification from a game that I play and I'll just feel the need to, do the daily challenges or whatever, and
So you think your productivity goes down with the cell phone in class?
I think it definitely did. Before I had a cell phone, I noticed that my grades were a lot better. Then after I got a cell phone, my parents noticed the next semester my grades definitely went down.
A lot of students spent a good amount of their time on their phones, even in class, and there wasn't a whole lot teachers could do about it. And I mean, in the end, it's only affecting them. They're only really there. It's a distraction to them. It's stopping them from getting that education they needed. But I think the main thing is just it is a big distraction.
It's a bit of a problem. I mean, a lot of people are playing video games a lot of the time. I know for a fact that they aren't being used as productive tools.
Geraldine Eileen Bonifacio Weeks. I'm going into 6th grade. Like, they're always texting and being disrespectful to their teachers. Kids don't really pay attention, and they're always worrying about when they get home so they can go play video games or something.
One school in Manitoba banned cell phone use. They said that it cut down on cyberbullying. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, that makes sense. Everyone sometimes will text me and stuff on their phone, right? So when you have the mask kind of, right, when you're not in person, it's a lot easier to say mean stuff to someone. I think there's pros and cons.
If cyberbullying is going down because of banning phones in school, I probably would say, ban phones from school.
That for sure would make sense, because if kids don't have their phones in schools, they can't be, let's just say, recording a video of someone to use that to cyberbully or something of that, of the sort of that. So.
Schools are supposed to be an accepting place and somewhere students should be able to go and feel comfortable learning and stuff. If they're going to school and, they're being cyberbullied while they're there, that's not a great space. I wouldn't exactly feel comfortable going to school, so if the ban led to students in general being happier, that's a great thing.
Of course, cutting down phones will reduce cyberbullying because there are less mediums to go through to cyberbully.
What happens if you're caught using your cell phone?
If it's during a lesson, sometimes you'll get detention, sometimes you'll get more minor infractions which add up over time towards something like detention.
So the first time the teacher takes it until the end of the class, the second time the teacher brings it to the office and you can get it at the end of the day. And the third time they bring it to the office and your parent or guardian has to come and collect the phone. And then they have to have a talk with you and your parent and guardian.
What do you think about teachers when you see them using cell phones in the classroom?
I've seen a lot of substitute teachers on their phones, though, doing things that are completely unrelated. And I remember that's always been a bit of a topic for the kids. So it's always funny just to see that they have the little signs in the classroom saying no cell phones. And
I have certainly seen teachers use cell phones, but I've never seen them use them during class if it's not for a necessary reason.
Does it affect your social circles if it's banned in the school?
It doesn't completely affect because you can still talk with people at school. I'd say the only thing is that it might be harder to find other people in the school. I'd say I'm 50-50. There are a lot of pros and cons.
Now that we have Chromebooks kind of spread throughout the school, I think phones don't really have that much of a purpose anymore. But there's definitely lots of uses for, your social life and stuff.
I have mixed feelings about it. I am not particularly strong towards either way. I think it could be good for some schools. I think it could be bad for others. So it really depends on the specific school that you're talking about, in my opinion.
Kind of reasonable in case they need to get a hold of their family or something.
Honestly, I don't think it's all that bad. It'll help students focus in class in general. And I mean, of course, there are certain things being able to text a loved one or something like that are necessary times. But for the general student, I don't think it's such a bad thing.
Some Winnipeg high school students speaking with CBC's Jim Agapito about a possible cell phone ban in local schools. Jim also spoke with parent Jordan Weeks about the impact it would have on his daughter, Geraldine, who we heard from earlier.
Honestly, there's pros and cons to it. I find if you're in school with your friends, technically you shouldn't have to be on your phone. And the only time you should really be on your phone is after school if you're contacting a parent or someone who's picking you up. Because when we were in school, I wasn't allowed to use the phone. Every time I got caught with the phone, I got taken away, put on the desk, right? So I don't get what changed from then to now. I think when we were in school, we didn't really have cell phones, so it was no cyberbullying. It didn't really, that's kind of a newer thing, right? Where back then it was a lot different. Your cell phone you had from 6 o'clock p.m. to 10 o'clock p.m., you didn't have an all-day phone at all.
Do you think the cell phone affects, kids' productivity in school?
Yes, for some, no with others, so I can't say it's the same for everybody. But I feel as though the kids with cell phones kind of know that it's a responsibility, right? With her, since she's the only one who has a cell phone, I literally tell her, the only times your phone should really being pulled out is at the end of the day if I'm coming to pick you up, your mom's coming to pick you up. But other than that, it has really no use. There's nobody you have to contact.
That was CBC's Jim Agapito speaking with parent Jordan Weeks on a potential school cell phone ban.
On the topics that matter, your voice should be heard.
I'm really concerned. And I'm not really happy about that.
Radio Noon is where you can voice your take. I'm Janet Stewart. From 12:30 to 1 p.m., Radio Noon opens the phone lines on one important topic.
It just brings everyone together.
Radio Noon's call-in segment, 204-780-0893. We want to hear from you, weekdays on CBC.
24 minutes after 8 o'clock, you're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1 from Winnipeg. I'm Emily Brass. Bird watchers often describe these critters as a cross between a bumblebee and a hummingbird. The hummingbird moth is about the size of a bumblebee, but it flies and feeds like a hummingbird, and it flies during the daytime, so you might just see it. CBC's Giacomo Panico headed out to the Fletcher Wildlife Garden in Ottawa to find out more.
Hi, my name is Chris Schmidt, research scientist at the Canadian National Collection with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. Moths in general, but hummingbird moths have a special place in my mind, I guess. They're a fascinating group that mimic anything from hummingbirds to bees, and they're very prominent in the public mind because they catch people's attention. They're very much a moth, although they often get mistaken for hummingbirds or even other insects because they can look very different from what most people think of as a moth. The caterpillars often catch people's attention too because they're very distinctive looking. They have a little horn at the end of their abdomen, so they will catch people's attention because they might look like something that might sting you, but they're completely harmless and they're very fascinating, beautiful.
And so what's your own story, Chris? How did you get into being a fan of birds and moths?
Well, it's funny that we're here talking about hummingbird moths because when I was about 7, I found a caterpillar of a hummingbird moth, and I was fascinated by it. I was telling you about this horn or little stinger-like thing they have at the back end, and I didn't know if it was harmful or not, so I took it home and figured out what it was, and that was sort of my first bug experience, and I guess the rest is history, and now I get to study them for a living. So
you didn't even know at that time it would turn into a beautiful moth.
No, I had no idea. Yeah.
Can they fly like a hummingbird? Can they hover?
Absolutely. So this is one of the really cool things about hummingbird moths and sphinx moths in general, the group that they belong to, is that they can fly just like a hummingbird, backwards, forwards. And they tend to be noticed more because a lot of them are day flying. So unlike most moths, hummingbird moths and sphinx moths generally, many of them are day flying. So we'll see them at flowers doing, basically what we think of hummingbirds as doing, going back and forth into a flower to get nectar. Most moths have what's called a haustellum. So sometimes that gets called a tongue, but it's more like a straw than a tongue. And sphinx moths and hummingbird moths are particularly noteworthy for their incredibly long tongues, some of these. This is known to be a way to access extremely deep nectar tubes in certain kinds of flowers. So in some tropical species, the length of that haustellum, of that tube-like straw, can exceed the length of the body. So some of them, they will have a tongue longer than the length of your hand. Some of them look almost exactly like a hummingbird when they're doing their hovering thing. The wing pattern and even that long haustellum, that tongue that they have, will look like a hummingbird beak when you watch closely. The usual life cycle for moths, which hummingbird moths also follow, is that the caterpillar will then pupate, so make its pupa, often underground, or sometimes they'll make a silk cocoon. They will rest in there and then undergo what's called metamorphosis and completely change from this fleshy caterpillar-like grub to a moth. So the hummingbird moth itself is just one little group of what are called sphinx moths, and these are generally very distinctive-looking moths. The hummingbird moths in particular are part of a group called clear wings. Most people would probably mistake them for hummingbirds because they have clear windows in their wings. So instead of the usual colors, they will shed all the scales that make the pattern on the wings. They will shed that so that the wing appears clear, so that they can really get this look as a bumblebee. People who are bird watching or butterfly watching will notice them more than something that's out only at night. I mean, it really brings awareness to a huge part of the diversity that's all around us. It's not something that most people think of as being part of the diversity of the nature that's around us, but insects in general, and particularly things like moths, make up a huge portion of the natural diversity.
That was Chris Schmidt, a research scientist for Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, and he was talking about the hummingbird clearwing moths. And I went ahead and Googled it, and wow, they really do look like hummingbirds flying with that kind of straw-like thing coming out of their mouth to get the nectar out of the flowers. Really worth checking out the pictures if you can. We're coming up on local news time. You're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1. I'm Emily Brass in this week for Marcy Marcusa. A look at the forecast. Mainly cloudy today. Slight chance of showers and risk of a thunderstorm. Pretty breezy with gusts up to 50 kilometers an hour. High 28 today, but it's going to feel like 33 with the humidex. In Brandon, mainly cloudy. 60% chance of showers. Risk of a thunderstorm. Breezy there too. High 23. 31 with the humidex. Dauphin, mainly cloudy. Chance of showers. Risk of a thunderstorm. Breezy again. High 24. 31 with the humidity. And up in Thompson, a mix of sun and cloud. Becoming cloudy this afternoon with a 60% chance of showers late in the day. Risk of a thunderstorm then as well with local smoke. High 26, 30 with the humidex. The news is next.
This is CBC News. At 8:30, it's partly cloudy and 20 in downtown Winnipeg. It's 17 in Carman and 14 in Tuduli Lake. Good morning. I'm Josh Crabb. The sister of a 15-year-old attacked with a machete says it's a miracle her brother is alive. His skull is fractured. He had nerves reattached on his hands, legs, back, and face. The teen was walking with some friends on Selkirk Avenue near Aikens after a soccer game Saturday night. The sister says the group came across an intoxicated woman and offered to help.
She started screaming that she had friends that would beat them up or whatever. So they left her alone. They kept walking, and sure enough, two people came out and started chasing them. And they ran, and they caught him and robbed him and beat him.
The teen is on bed rest now after a 20-hour surgery. The accused, another 15-year-old boy, is charged with aggravated assault. The sister wants those charges upgraded to attempted murder because of the severity of the attack. A family who fled missiles in the skies over Ukraine has been attacked with baseball bats in the streets of Winnipeg. A mother and her 14-year-old son were badly beaten in an unprovoked daylight assault in the Elmwood East Kildonan area. It happened on the afternoon of August 3rd. Two men in their 20s face numerous charges. The boy remains in hospital with severe injuries. Joanne Lewandowski is the president of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress in Manitoba.
We have a strong Ukrainian community, and we are a very welcoming province. They've come here to start a new life. They're looking for safety. And I have to say, I'm not too sure if there is that much safety.
The attack happened a few blocks away from a fatal stabbing last December. The victim in that case was a Ukrainian immigrant who was on his way to work. Library hours in Winnipeg are set to expand starting this fall, but one parent in Fort Garry says her local branch is losing out. Carla Epp takes her kids to the library in the mornings, but the Fort Garry Library branch is expected to lose 3 mornings as opening hours are pushed back from 10 a.m. to noon. For Epp and her kids, that means fewer opportunities to take out books and access programming.
If you look at libraries across the country, we are poorly funded, poorly resourced. We have far fewer programs. We just don't offer nearly as much. And it's one of the few free things, free resources, free places. It's an equalizer for people.
A report last fall found Winnipeggers were frustrated by inconsistent and confusing hours at library branches. The changes take effect September 3rd and will increase library hours overall by 12%. The Canadian Army is facing a critical budget shortfall after the Liberal government promised an internal budget-cutting exercise that would not affect the military's ability to respond to a crisis. Murray Brewster has more.
That it does not in any way diminish the capacity of the Canadian Armed Forces.
Defence Minister Bill Blair last fall, being given a rough ride before a Commons committee about DND's planned internal cuts of almost $1 billion. In response to recent questions from CBC News, the Army has acknowledged that its pool of cash for equipment and vehicle maintenance has a shortfall of $150 to $260 million. Retired Lieutenant General Andrew Leslie says there's a clear disconnect between what the minister promised and what's happening.
He's either misinformed or he's not telling the truth.
Overall, the Canadian military is getting more money, but that federal budget increase is being eaten up by spending on new big-ticket items, such as F-35s and Navy supply ships. Murray Brewster, CBC News, Ottawa.
Police in New Zealand are trying to track down meth-laced candy. A charity handed out the candy not knowing it was tainted. Up to 400 people may have received the candy as part of a food parcel from the Auckland City Mission. At least 3 people, including a child, have had to seek medical attention. Glenn Baldwin is a detective inspector with New Zealand Police.
Forensic testing has been carried out with one of the lollies with the confirmation that it is methamphetamine. Police are treating these lollies as fully contaminated until we can prove otherwise. It is vital they are taken out of circulation as soon as possible.
Officials say the candy was sealed in a retail package and was part of an anonymous donation. Police say each one could have a street value of more than 800 Canadian dollars. And there will be a service interruption coming up this morning on CBC's 990 AM signal due to tower maintenance west of Winnipeg. The outage will begin in just under 10 minutes, just over 10 minutes at 8:45 this morning, and the repairs are expected to be completed by 6 tonight. Meantime, on Friday, people listening to 89.3 FM will also experience a service interruption. You can tune into an alternate signal or listen to the app at cbc.ca/listen. That is the CBC News from Winnipeg. Your next local news is at 9 o'clock.
Yeah, if you usually check us out on 990 AM, tune in on the FM at 89.3 FM and vice versa while this work's happening.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, Josh. Hope you have a great day.
You too. Take care.
That's CBC's Josh Crabb, and Abby Adiemi joins us with one last look at the weather.
Yes, expect mostly cloudy skies with a mix of showers and thunderstorms in the forecast. Temperatures in most regions at this time is at 20 degrees, and that condition will be breezy and to light later in the afternoon and in the evening period. For Winnipeg, it will be a mix of sun and clouds, sun and some slight chance of showers this afternoon. There's also a risk of thunderstorm. It will be breezy. We're going to get to a high of 28. In other regions, air quality advisory due to smoke from that forest fire for Churchill and Thompson. A heat warning also in effect, and it will be getting to a high of 26 in Thompson, 31 for Churchill. Down south, Dauphin is under severe thunderstorm watch, and for Brandon, Gimli, Steinbach, Morris, a cloudy day ahead with scattered showers here and there, a risk of thunderstorm, and temperatures will climb to 28, and the evening into the night period will remain cloudy with a chance of rain.
Fingers crossed for some thunder and lightning tonight for me, Abby. Thank you so much. It was great talking with you this morning.
Same here.
And thank you, everyone, for listening today to Information Radio. I'm filling in this week for Marcy Marcusa. My name is Emily Brass. And The Current's up next with a look at what's going on in Ukraine. We'll see you tomorrow. Hope you have a great day.